Chapter 11 of Beyond These Voices. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 11. It was Saturday, and they were at River Mead, one of those ideal places that seem to have been raised along the upper Thames by an enchanter's wand, rather than by the vulgar arts of architect and builder, so exquisitely do they harmonise with the landscape that enshrines them. No hideous chimney, no mammoth reservoir, no thriving metropolitan high street defiled the neighbourhood of River Mead. All around was rustic peace, green meadows and blue waters, amidst which there lay gardens that had taken a century to make, grass walks between yew hedges and labyrinths of roses, and in the distance purple woods that melted into a purple horizon. It was a place that people always thought of as steeped in golden sunlight, but not even in the glory of a midsummer afternoon was River Mead quite as lovely as on such a night as this, when Claude and Veera strolled slowly along the river path in the silver light of a great round moon hung in the blue deep of a sky without a cloud. The magic of night and moonshine was upon everything. The mystery of light and shadow gave a charm to things that were commonplace by day, to the white balustrade in front of the drawing-rooms, to the flight of steps and the marble vases, above which the lighted windows shone golden, the gaudy yellow light of indoor lamps shamed by the white glory of the moon. The windows were all open, and the voices of the card-players travelled far in the clear air. They could even hear the light sound of their cards, manipulated by a dexterous hand. Everybody was playing bridge. Everybody was absorbed in the game, winning or losing, happy or unhappy, but absorbed. Except these two. Everybody except these two, who had been missing since 10 o'clock, and the great stable clock had sounded its 12 slow, sonorous strokes half an hour ago. They had not been wanted. The tables were all full. 2 or 3 of the players had looked round the room once or twice, and, noting their absence, had exchanged the quiet smile, the almost imperceptible elevation of arched eyebrows with which, in a highly civilised community, characters can be killed. For Lady Okehampton, she who had more than once sounded the note of warning, and who should have been on the alert to see danger signals, from the moment the tables were opened and the players seated, the world of men and women outside that charmed space, where cards fluttered lightly upon smooth green cloth, 4 eager faces watching them as they fell, had ceased to exist. She was not a stupid woman, but she had a mind that moved slowly, and she could not think of 2 serious things at once. For her, bridge was a serious thing, and from tea-time on Saturday till this Sunday midnight, bridge had occupied all her thoughts to the exclusion of every other consideration. Smiles might be exchanged and eyebrows raised when, on Sunday morning, Claude Rutherford carried off her niece 2 miles up the river to a village church, which by his account was a gem in early Gothic that was worth more than the 2 miles sculling a light skiff against the current. But Lady Okehampton was too absorbed even to wonder whether there was anything not quite correct in the excursion. Why should not people want to see the old church at Allersley? It was one of the lions of the neighbourhood, and counted among the attractions of River Mead. Lady Okehampton's cards on Saturday night had seemed to be dealt to her by a malignant fiend, an invisible devil guiding the smooth white hands of human dealers. She had lain awake till the Sunday morning bells were ringing for the early service to which good people were going, fresh and light of foot, with minds at ease. She had tossed and turned in her sumptuous bed, in a feverish unrest, playing her miserable hands over and over again, with the restless blood in her brain going round and round like a mill wheel, or plunging backwards and forwards like a piston rod. There had been no time to think of Vera and Claude. She could think only of Sunday evening, and of her chance of revenge. It was not that she minded her money losses, which were despicable when reckoned against the price of Oakhampton's autumn sport. £2,000 for a grouse moor and a salmon river, an outlay of which he talked as lightly as if it were a new hat. The money was nothing. He would give as much for an Irish setter as she lost in an evening. But the vexation and humiliation of a long evening's bad luck were too much for nerves that had been strained to snapping point by many seasons of experimental treatment all over Europe, and the mistress of Rivermead had left her visitors to amuse themselves at their own sweet will until dinner time on Sunday evening, while their hostess slept in her easy chair by the open window of her morning room, soothed by the lullaby of the stream running down the weir, and sweet airs from a garden of roses, such roses as only grow in a riverside garden. The choice of amusements or occupations after luncheon on the Sunday afternoon was somewhat limited. 2 girls and their youthful admirers played a 4-handed game of croquet. A middle-aged spinster, who had been suspected of tricky play on Saturday, trudged 1.25 miles to the little town, where there was a church so old-fashioned as to provide a substantial afternoon service for adult worshippers. Most of the masculine guests wrote letters, or read Sunday papers in the billiard-room, or slumbered in basket chairs on the river lawn. Vera and Claude did nothing out of the common in strolling up the hill to the wood, where they lost themselves during the lazy 2 hours between the end of a leisurely luncheon and the appearance of tea-tables in the shady drawing-room. Coming back a little tired after her idle afternoon, Vera sat on a sofa in the darkest corner of the spacious room, by the side of a comfortable matron, an old friend of her aunt's, with whom she exchanged amiable truisms and mild opinions upon books, plays, and sermons, a kind of talk that demanded neither thought nor effort, while Claude sat among a distant group, bored to death, but smiling and courteous. After tea there was the garden till dressing time. Everybody was in the garden, so it was only natural that these two should be sauntering in lanes of roses, exchanging light talk with other saunterers, and lingering a little at the crossing of the ways, where the slow drip of a fountain made a coolness in the sultry evening, or stopping at an opening in the flowery rampart to look across the blue water towards the grey old tower and listen to the pensive music of church bells. These two had been alone all day, without interference or espial from chaperone aunt, unconscious of observation, if they were observed, alone in this little world of summer verdure and sunlit water, as much alone as in a pathless wilderness. All that long summer day they had been alone, talking, as only lovers talk. And now, at midnight, they were still alone in the garden that was changed in the moonlight, changed from the warm glow of colour to the silvery paleness and mysterious shadow, in which the prolific clusters of the Félicité perpétuelle looked like the ghosts of roses. If it were sin to love, the sin had been sinned, from the hour in which he had drawn the confession of her love from the lips that he kissed for the first time. She had tried to hold him off, tried to keep those lips unprofaned by the kiss of guilt. They were alone in the wood on the hill that fatal Sunday afternoon, safe only for the moment, since the woodland path was a favourite walk with visitors at Rivermead. But he had drawn her from the footpath into the shade of great beech trees, and they were alone. He had kissed her, and she had submitted to the guilty kiss. and she knew that she was lost. Did she love him? She whispered yes. With all her heart and soul? Yes. Could she be happy if he left her forever? No, no, no. Could she give up all the world for him, as he would for her? The lips that he had kissed were too tremulous for speech. She hid her face upon his breast and was dumb. "The die is cast," he said in a low, grave voice, "and now we have only to think of our future." Our future? Henceforth they were one, united by a bond as strong as if they had been married before the high altar in Westminster Abbey, with all the best people in London looking on and approving the bond. Nothing else could matter now. They belonged to each other. He was to command, and she was to obey. It was almost as if, in the moment of her confession, her personal entity had ceased. In all those hours of delicious intimacy, in fond imaginings of their future life, the thought of her husband had never come between her and her lover. And tonight, when she thought of Mario Provana, it was only to tell herself that he had long ceased to care for her, and that it would not hurt him if she were to vanish out of his life. Provana had been gone more than 14 days, and his cabled messages told her of delays and difficulties. The financial crisis was more serious than he had anticipated, and he would have to see it out. He had sent her several messages, but only one letter. A kind letter, such as an uncle might have written to a niece. But it seemed to her there was no love in it, not even such love as he had lavished on his daughter. There was nothing left of the love that had wrapped her round like summer's sunlight, the strong man's love that had made her so proud of having been chosen by him, so tranquil in the assurance of her happiness that nothing could change. The change had come before they had lived a year in that great gloomy London house, when she had been less than 2 years a wife. It was after parting with Claude in the garden and creeping quietly up to her room in the second hour of the new day, while doors were beginning to open and voices to sound as the card players bade good night. It was in the stillness of the pretty guest chamber that Vera began to think of Mario Provana, and the impassioned love that had ended in a frozen aloofness. He had said, "Let there be no pretending." Could he have told her more absolutely that his love was dead, and that no charm of sweetness in her could make it live again? She had made her poor little attempt to win him back, and it had failed. What more was left but to be happy in her own way? End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 12. The season was dying hard. Lady Leominster's ball at the great old house at Fulham was the last flash of an expiring fire. The Houses of Parliament had closed their historic doors. The walls of the Royal Academy had been stripped of their masterpieces, and empty themselves, looked down upon dusty emptiness. All the best theatres were shut. London was practically empty. The few thousand lingerers in a wilderness of deserted streets bewailed the inanity of the daily press. There was nothing in the morning papers, and the evening papers were worse, since they were obliged to echo the morning nothingness. The people who never read books were longing for something startling in those indispensable papers, were it even a declaration of war. Suddenly, their longing was satisfied. The morning papers were devoured with eagerness. The evening paper was waited for with feverish expectancy. All of a sudden, the great army of the brainless found themselves with something to think about, something to talk about, something upon which to build up hypotheses to which, once built, they adhered with a fierce persistency. There had been a murder in the heart of London, in one of the fine houses of the West End. Not one of the finest, for, after all, spacious and splendid as the house might be, it was not like Berkeley or Devonshire, Lansdowne or Stafford. It was only one in a row of spacious houses, the house of a foreign financier, a man who dealt in millions, and who was himself the owner of millions. Mario Provana had been murdered in his own house, shot through the heart by an unknown assassin who had done his work well enough to leave no clue to his identity. Speculation might rove at will. Theory and hypothesis might run riot. Here was endless talk for dinner tables, inexhaustible copy for the newspaper. A man of great wealth, of exalted position in the world of finance, not commerce. Here was no dealer in commodities, no manufacturer of cocoa or sugar or reels of cotton, but a man who dealt in the world's wealth and could make peace or war by opening or closing his money bags. People who had never seen the great man's face in the flesh were just as keenly interested in the circumstances of his death as the people who had dined at his table and had known him as intimately as such men ever are known. A rough print of his photograph was in every halfpenny paper, and the likeness of his beautiful young wife was travestied in some of them. Pictures of the house in Portland Place, front and back view, were in all the papers. Columns of picturesque reporting described the man and the house, the beautiful young wife, the sumptuous furniture, the numerous household, the splendid entertainments which had made the house famous for the last 6 or 7 years. And for the murdered man himself, no details were omitted. Interviews were invented in which, during the last year, Signor Provana had expounded his opinions and views of that sphere of life in which he exercised so vast an influence, his ideas political, his tastes in art and literature, music, and the drama. Minute descriptions of his person were given in the same glowing style. The picturesque reporter made the dead man alive again for the million readers who were panting for details that would help them to strengthen their own pet theory or to crush an opponent. Thousands of sensation hunters went to Portland Place to look at the house that held that dreadful mystery of a life untimely cut short by the hand of a murderer. Loafers stood on the pavement and gazed, as if their hungry eyes would have pierced dead walls and darkened windows. The loafers knew that the house was in charge of the police and that a vigilant watch was being kept there. They wondered whether the lovely young wife was in the house. They pictured her weeping alone in one of those darkened rooms, yet were inclined to think that her friends would have insisted on her leaving that house of gloom, and would have carried her off to some less terrible place for rest and comfort. The first idea was the correct one. Vera was lying in that spacious bedchamber behind 3 windows on the 2nd floor, where ivy-leaved geraniums were falling in showers of pale pink blossom from the flower boxes. She was lying on the vast Italian bed, lying like a stone figure, while Susan Amphlett sat by the bed and wept and sighed, with intervals of vague, consoling speech, till, finding that speech elicited no reply, and indeed seemed unheard, she had at last, in sheer vacuity of mind, to take refuge in the first book within reach of her hand. It was one among many small volumes on a table by the bed. Omar Khayyam. Oh, what a dreary book, thought Susie, who was beginning to feel her office of consoler something of a burden. She had hated entering that dreadful house, as she always called it in her thoughts, since she had heard of the murder, and now to be sitting there in that deadly silence, in that grey light from shrouded windows, to be sitting there with the knowledge that only a little way off, in another darkened room at the back of the dreadful house, there lay death in its most appalling form, was a kind of martyrdom for which Susie was unprepared, and which she was not constituted to suffer calmly or lightly. As she had hated old age, so, with a deeper hate, she hated death. To hear of it, to be forced to think of it, was agonizing, and to visualize the horror lying so near her, a murdered man in his blood-stained shroud, made her start up from her easy chair and begin to roam about the room in restlessness and fear. She lifted the edge of a blind and peered into the street. The sight of the people staring up at the house was comforting. They were alive. There were people standing in the road, looking up with widened eyes, so absorbed in what they saw or wanted to see, that they ran a risk of sudden annihilation from a motor car and skipped off to the opposite pavement, there to content themselves with a more distant view. There never was such a murder, Susie said to herself. I think every soul in town must have come to look at this horrid house since 11 o'clock this morning. It was now past 3, in a dull, sultry afternoon. Susie spent all the intervening hours in the silent room in the dreadful house. She was sorry for her friend, but she was still more sorry for herself. All those hours of silent horror, without any luncheon, and no good done. What was the use of sitting by the bed, where a woman lay dumb and motionless, unconsoled by affectionate murmurs from a bosom friend, apparently unconscious that the friend was there? Lady Susan called in Hanover Square on her way home and ordered a black frock, lustreless silk that would stand alone, with a shimmer of sequins flashing through crape. Not this week's fashion, nor last week's, but the fashion of the week after next. The style that was coming, not the style that had come. This was her one agreeable half-hour in all that dismal day. I may be dining with Vera next week, and it will be only kind to wear mourning, Susan told herself, as she ordered the gown. End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Sarah in Brighton. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 13. Mrs. Provana's French maid was the first witness at the coroner's inquest. The first question she had to answer was as to when she had last seen Mr. Provana alive, and the same question was put to all succeeding witnesses. The answer in each case was the same. Neither any member of the household nor the confidential clerk from the city had seen the deceased after he left London on his journey to New York. It was Louison Dupuis, Mrs. Provana's maid, who had discovered the dead man lying on the floor of his dressing room, close against the door of communication with her mistress's bedroom. Hers had been the first foot on the principal staircase that morning. No other servant was licensed to tread those stairs in the routine of their servitude. The rooms they slept in and the stairs by which they went up and down were at the back of the house, remote from the principal staircase. Mademoiselle Louison looked scared and trembled a little as she told her dreadful story. It was her duty to carry Madame her tea at 7 o'clock. Madame desired to be called at that hour, even when she had come home from a party after midnight. The witness stated that the still room maid had the tray ready for her at 10 minutes to 7, and that she went up the staircase of service with it to the second floor, and through the palier outside Madame's room, and thence through the open doorway of Monsieur's cabinet de toilette. She saw a figure lying with the face downward. She had reason to believe that Monsieur Provana was in America. Nothing had been said in the household of his expected return, yet she knew at the first glance that the man lying there was her master. He was a man of imposing figure, not easily mistaken. The horror of it had unnerved her, and she had rushed down this great staircase to the hall, where two of the footmen were opening windows and arranging the furniture. She told them what she had seen, and one of them went to fetch Mr. Sedgewick, the butler. Her evidence was given in a semi-hysterical and somewhat disjointed manner, with occasional use of French words for familiar things, but the coroner had been patient with her as an important witness, being the first who had cognizance that murder had been done in the night silence. Alfred Sedgewick, the butler, was a very different witness, self-possessed and ready, eager to express his opinion and having to be held with a tight hand. He described with studious particularity how on leaving his room on that morning, having just finished dressing and having been kept waiting for his shaving water, he had run against Mademoiselle, who was rushing along the passage in a frantic manner, pale as death and with eyes starting out of her head, a young person who was apt to excite herself about trifles, and who on this occasion seemed absolutely demented. On hearing Mademoiselle's statement, given in so distracted a manner that only a person of superior intelligence could find out what she meant, he had immediately sent out one of the footmen to the police office to fetch a capable officer. It was no case for the first constable called in from the street. He, Sedgewick, had then gone upstairs with another of the men, and had found the dead body lying, as Mademoiselle had stated, against the door of communication with Mrs. Provana's bedroom. The face was hidden, but he had not an instant's doubt as to the dead man's identity, for, apart from the commanding figure, the left hand was visible, on which the witness observed an old Italian ring with his master always wore. He had touched the hand and found it was the hand of death, yet in the circumstances he had considered it his duty to telephone for the doctor. The room in which the body lay was used by his master as a dressing room, but it was also used by him as a study, and there was a large office desk in front of one of the windows, at which Mr. Provana sometimes sat writing late into the night. There was also a safe in which his master was supposed to keep important papers and possibly cash. It was not a large safe, but it was of exceptional strength and of the most modern and costly make. This safe was open when the police took possession of the room, after the removal of the body under the doctor's superintendence. There were no signs of disorder in the room, except that the pistol case on the desk was open, and both pistols were lying on the floor, one near the hand of the deceased, the other near the desk. The safe had not been forced open. The key was in the door, one of 3 small keys on a steel ring engraved with Signor Provana's name and address. His master always carried these keys in one of his pockets. When was Madame Provana informed of her husband's death? Not until 8:30, when Lady Okehampton came. Mrs. Manby, the housekeeper, went in a cab to Berkeley Square to tell her ladyship what had happened, and Lady Okehampton came to the house in the cab with Mrs. Manby. Had not Mrs. Provana been awakened by the sounds of voices and footsteps on the landing? No, everything had been done with the utmost quiet. There had been no talking above a whisper. His mistress had been at the ball at Fulham Park, and had not come home till 3:00, and she was still sleeping when Lady Okehampton went into her room. The doctor was the next witness. The medical evidence did not take long. In answer to the coroner, the doctor stated that he was in the habit of attending the household, and had been summoned by telephone immediately on the discovery of the tragedy. The body was lying facing the door between the 2 rooms, and at no great distance from it. It was semi-prone on its left side, the arms extended from the body but flexed. A loaded pistol lay close to the fingers of the right hand. Life was extinct. Blood had trickled from a wound in the back of the head, and formed a pool on the floor. The direction of the trickle from wound to floor was vertical. There were no other bloodstains. A further examination demonstrated that the wound was due to a bullet, that the bullet had entered the head horizontally and penetrated the brain. The bullet was found to fit a pistol lying in the room, recently discharged, evidently companion to the one already mentioned. Both fitted a case found on a table in front of the window. The witness was of opinion: 1. That death was due to shock from bullet wound. 2. That death had been almost instantaneous and had taken place within 3 hours of the time when the witness examined the body. 3. That the wound was not self-inflicted nor accidental, but that the shot had been deliberately fired and at no great distance. The person who fired the shot was probably somewhat taller than the deceased. Upon this, Sedgwick, the butler, was recalled, and there followed an exhaustive interrogation as to the arrangements on the ground floor of the house. A plan had been made of the doors and passages on this floor: the great double doors of ceremony opening into the hall, the tradesmen's door, and another door communicating with the stables, which were almost as spacious in that old London house as in a country mansion of some importance. At the back of the hall there was a wide stone corridor leading to the door opening on the stable yard, and other passages to pantry, plate room, lamp room, and the men servants' bedrooms, which were all on the ground floor. He valeted his master when he was at home, but he did not travel with him. Mr. Provana required very little personal attendance. He had always been aware that his master kept loaded pistols in the case on his desk. He understood that there was a large amount of valuable property in that room, where the deceased used often to sit writing late at night, with open windows in summer time, when Mrs. Provana was at evening parties. The pistols were in charge of the police on a table in court, old-fashioned duelling pistols, choice specimens of Italian workmanship. The door at the end of the corridor was often used by Mr. Provana, and one of the keys on the ring before mentioned was the latch-key belonging to this door. He was in the habit of walking to the city, and he used this door every morning, passing the stables on his way. He was very fond of his horses, and he often went into the stables and had the horses brought out to look at them. The stable yard opened into Chiltern Street. This door, communicating with the well-guarded stable yard, was fastened with a latch lock and heavy bolts, but the bolts were not often used, and Sedgwick said that it was by this door his master must have entered the house on the night of the murder, as the doors in Portland Place had been bolted and chained at 10 minutes past 3 o'clock after Mrs. Provana came home. The coroner, with the plan of the rooms before him, pointed to that occupied by Sedgwick. Was it possible for a stranger to have entered the house after or before your master, without your hearing the opening of the door or his footsteps in the passage? Sedgwick concluded that it was possible, since the thing must have happened. He was ordinarily a particularly light sleeper. Was there ever a servant who confessed to being anything else? He had been to a theatre that evening, and may have slept sounder than usual. Did none of the other men hear anything? John Footman had heard the dog bark. John was duly sworn, and stated that he had been awakened by hearing the dog, an Irish terrier, and he had sat up in bed and listened, but the dog had given only that one bark, by which he, John, concluded that the animal, which slept on a mat outside his room, had been dreaming. Interrogated as to time, he had heard the hall clock strike 5, not very long after the dog barked. It might be a quarter of an hour, or it might be half an hour. On this followed the interrogation of stable servants as to the gates opening in Chiltern Street, the result of which showed that the stable gates had not been locked that morning. It was broad daylight when the grooms finished their work and turned in for a morning's sleep. The last of the stable servants to retire had heard the clock strike 4 as he went to his bedroom. Mrs. Provana was there to answer all further questions concerning her style. She stood up by the table, facing the coroner. She stood there, an exquisite figure, slender and erect, her countenance and her attitude sublime in composure, grace, and refinement in every line. The few of her friends who had found their way into the court, and who were standing discreetly in the background, Mr. Simeon, Mr. Amphlett, and Lady Susan, Father Cyprian Hammond, Claude Rutherford, Eustace Lyon, the poet, these admired and wondered. With no vestige of colour in cheek or lip, with eyes that had grown larger in the new horror of her life, yet unutterably calm, With not one passing tremor in the low voice, and with not one instant of hesitation, she answered the coroner's questions. At what time had she fallen asleep after her return from Fulham Park? It must have been past 4 o'clock. Was your maid in attendance upon you when you went to bed? No, I have never allowed my maid to sit up for me after a late party. Are you a heavy sleeper? Not usually, but I was very tired that night. Eustace Lyon noticed that she spoke of that night, the night before last, as if it had been ages ago. The fact appealed to his imagination as a poet. He remarked afterwards that it was only poets who perceive such subtle indications. Did you hear nothing between 6 and 8:30? Nothing. A plan of the upper floor was lying in front of the coroner, and he was studying the position of the rooms. The room in which the shot was fired has a door communicating with your bedroom. Yes. Was that door shut? It is always shut. Shut, but not locked. No, it was not locked. The poet and Mr. Simeon looked at each other as she made this answer, with unalterable composure. The coroner was an elderly man, a doctor, grave always, but especially so on this occasion, for this was an exceptional case, and appealed to him in an exceptional manner. The murder was even more mysterious than terrible, and he was at once touched and mystified by the unshaken composure of this young woman, who had been awakened from her morning sleep to be told that her husband had been murdered within a few yards of the room where she had been sleeping, full of happy dreams, perhaps after the pleasant excitement of a dance. Except for a strained look in the large grey eyes, there was nothing in her aspect to indicate the ordeal through which she had passed within the last 2 days. "Isn't she simply wonderful?" murmured Susan Amphlett in the ear of Mr. Simeon, who was standing by her chair. "She has been like that ever since." There was no need to say since what. "I was with her all yesterday, but it was not a bit of use. She has turned to stone. Not a tear, not a cry, only that dreadful look in her eyes, as if she were seeing him murdered. It would have been a relief to hear her scream or burst into a flood of tears." "That kind of woman does neither," said Simeon. "She is a grand soul, not a bundle of nerves. She has force and courage, and she knows that death does not matter." The coroner treated this witness with the utmost respect, but he did not spare her. A crime so extraordinary demanded a severe investigation, and searching questions had to be asked. Had Mr. Provana a quarrel with anybody, either in his social or business relations? Did the witness know of any incident in her husband's life, in England or in Italy, which might suggest a motive for the crime? The answer to both questions was a negative. "But he might have had a secret enemy without your knowledge." "It is possible. He would not have told me anything that would have made me anxious or unhappy." For the first time there was a faint tremor in her voice as she said this, and the poet whispered 3 words in Lady Susan's ear. "She loved him." Asked whether she expected her husband's return, she replied that she had received no cablegram naming the steamer by which he was to return. She had received letters and cablegrams, but none within the last 6 days before his death. Asked whether they were on good terms when he left England, she replied that there had never been a difference of any kind between them. She refused to be seated during this ordeal, and stood facing her questioner till he had asked his last question, and when Lady Okehampton came to her, wanting to lead her away, she insisted upon remaining near the end of the table, where the witnesses came one after another to give their evidence. The coroner heard those low, distinct words, "I want to hear everything," and he noted how she stood there, watching and listening to the end of the inquiry, regardless of her aunt's endeavour to get her away from the spot. A confidential clerk from Mr. Provana's office in Lombard Street was able to give an account of the safe in his principal's dressing room, as he had often been in the room occupied in examining documents with his employer and in taking shorthand notes for letters to be written in Lombard Street. He had examined the contents of the safe after the murder. The door had been opened with Mr. Provana's private key, which he always carried about him. Certain securities were missing, but the valuables abstracted were of a much less amount than might have been taken by anyone acquainted with the nature of the papers the safe contained, and able to use his knowledge to advantage. 2 parcels of foreign bonds were missing. the present value of which would be about £6,000. The witness had an inventory of everything in this safe, and he had found all other parcels intact, although the contents of the drawers and shelves had been greatly disturbed, and the papers thrown about as if some person in haste. Would these bonds be easily convertible into cash? They are bonds to bearer, and there would be no difficulty of disposing of them at their value. The inquiry was adjourned. Vera was surrounded by her friends, Lady Okehampton, Lady Susan, Mr. Simeon, and Claude Rutherford. Even Eustace Lyon ventured to approach her. "Forgive me for intruding at such a moment," she said, almost breathless with excitement. "I feel that I must speak." "You are sublime! Simeon is right. You are spirit and not clay. It needs something more than flesh and blood to go through what you have endured today." She looked at him with the same strained look in her eyes with which she had looked at the coroner, a look of surprise, as if, in the midst of a dream, she had been startled by a living voice. End of chapter 13. Recording by Sarah in Brighton.
Chapter 14 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dylan Campbell. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 14. Vera insisted on going back to the house of death, although her aunt and Susan Amphlett were equally urgent in trying to take her home with them. "Why should you make a martyr of yourself?" Susie urged in her vehement way. "You can do him no good. He will not know. All the dead want is silence and darkness, and to be mourned by those they love. You will mourn for him just as sincerely in my dainty spare room in Green Street as in that wilderness of empty rooms where he lies." "Yes, I shall mourn for him," said Vera in low, measured tones. "I shall mourn for him all my life." "No, Shetty," murmured Susan confidently as they moved towards the door. "You will always be sorry for his quite too dreadful death, and you will remember all his goodness and absolute devotion to you. But you have your own life before you. You are not like some poor old thing who feels that life is done with when she is left a widow, nothing to look forward to but charity bazaars and pug dogs. Remember how young you are, child, almost on the threshold of life. You don't know how I envy you when I think I am such ages older. You are going to be immensely rich, and by you will marry someone you can adore, as poor Provana adored you. And whatever you do, Vera, don't wait till you are fat and elderly, and then marry a boy, as I've known a widow do, out of respect for a first husband." Susan felt she had now hit upon the right note, and was really a consoler, but nothing she could say had any effect upon her friend. "I am going home," she said. "The house is dreadful, but I'd rather be there than anywhere else." She had only the same answer for her aunt when urged to stay at Berkeley Square, at least until all this troublesome business of the inquest is over. "I can't think why the coroner could not have finished today," Lady Okehampton said to her husband at dinner that evening. "They had the doctor's evidence, and the servants and the clerks. All the circumstances were made clear. Every detail of the poor thing's death was gone into. What more could be wanted?" "Only one detail. To find the murderer. If ever I were to be murdered, I hope the inquiry would address itself more to the man who did it than to the way in which it was done, and that the coroner would stick to his work till he found the fellow who killed me. If he didn't, I believe I should walk at midnight, like Hamlet's father." Claude Rutherford was among the friends who surrounded Vera as she left the court. His mother was with him, an unexpected figure in such a scene, and while her son said no word, Mrs. Rutherford murmured the gentle assurance of her sympathy. She had held herself aloof from Vera for a long time, disapproving of an intimacy in which she saw danger for her son, and discredit for Mario Provana's wife. But she came to this dismal court today, moved by divine compassion for the fragile creature who had become the central figure in so awful a tragedy. For the first time since she had entered the court, Vera's strained eyeballs clouded with tears, and the hand which Mrs. Rutherford held with a friendly pressure trembled violently. That unnatural calm of the last 2 hours had given way in the surprise of this meeting. Her carriage was waiting for her, and she stepped into it too quickly for Claude to help her. He could only stand among the others to see her driven away. "It was more than good of you to come to this dreadful place," he told his mother as they walked towards Piccadilly. "I would do anything to help her, if it were possible. She has not made the best use of her life so far. Perhaps she has only gone with the stream, like the herd of modern women who seem to have neither heart nor conscience. But this tragedy was a terrible awakening, and no one can help being sorry for her. The ruck of her friends will not be sorry. They will only chatter about her husband's death and discuss the amount of her fortune as his widow. You are right, mother. They have neither heart nor conscience. They care for nothing, hope for nothing, except to be better dressed and dine out oftener than other women. He spoke with unusual bitterness, and his mother looked at him anxiously. All the marks of a too feverish life showed upon his delicate countenance in the clear light of summer. He had never counted among handsome men, but a face so sensitive was more interesting than the beauty of line and color, and the people who knew Claude Rutherford knew that the sensitive face was the outward evidence of a highly emotional nature. "You are looking so tired and worn, Claude," his mother said anxiously. "Oh, this ghastly business has been a shock for me as well as for her. I was with her at the Fulham House ball the night before. We were waltzing in a mob of dancers, sitting out among tropical flowers, laughing together in the noise and laughter and foolish talk in the supper room. Such diamonds, such bare shoulders and enamelled faces. It was 2:30 when I took her to her carriage, and a black bird was whistling in the avenue. Everybody was pretending to be happy, and she went alone to that great, gloomy house to be awakened a few hours later to be told that her husband had been murdered." What could have been the motive for such a murder? Plunder? What else? Of course it was known that he kept valuables in that safe. How was it that he came home so unexpectedly? Heaven knows. Perhaps he wanted to give his wife a surprise. A grim joke in such a husband, and the result was grimmer than he could have anticipated. There was a savage bitterness in his tone that shocked the tender-hearted woman. "Don't speak of it like that, Claude. It is too dreadful to think of. He was a devoted husband from all that I have heard, only too blindly indulgent, letting his wife lead the wretched, empty-headed existence that can spoil even a good woman." They were at Mrs. Rutherford's door by this time, and she asked her son to give her a few minutes more before he went away. "As long as you like," he said. "I'm at a loose end. My usual diversions are out of the question, and all manner of work is impossible." "You must go away, Claude. You are too sensitive, too warm-hearted to get over this business easily. You ought to leave London for a long time." And then, with her hand on his shoulder, looking up at him with tearful solicitude, she enlarged upon that source of consolation to which a woman of deep religious convictions turns instinctively in the time of trouble. She reminded him of his happy and innocent boyhood, the unquestioning faith of those early years, before the leaven of doubt had entered his mind, before the Christian youth had become the trifler and cynic. He listened in silence with downcast eyes, and then, tenderly kissing her, he said gently, "Yes, perhaps there lies the cure. I must go back to those tranquil days. I must leave this hateful town. Yes, mother, I mean to go away, for a long time. I shall take your advice. If you see Father Hammond, I should like you to tell him about this talk of ours." "Why not go to him at once and make your confession? You'd feel happier afterwards." "I have not come to that yet. I mean to have a talk with him later. Arrivederci, madre mia." "Where are you going?" "I don't know. To my rooms, most likely. I have letters to write." He was gone before she could question him further. That business of letter writing was the most arduous work he knew. Since he had chucked art, his days had no more strenuous employment. His life was the over-occupied existence of a man of pleasure. End of chapter 14. Recording by Dylan Campbell. Chapter 15 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dylan Campbell. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 15. Lord Okehampton, discussing the financier's fate in a tete-a-tete dinner with his wife, was only one among a multitude who were thinking of the Provana murder. There is nothing that English men and women enjoy more than the crime which they call a really good murder. They will import sensation cases from America or the colonies, and they will try to feel as keenly interested in a murder in New York or Melbourne as in a London tragedy. But the keen relish is lacking where the crime has been done afar off. It is impossible to realize the scene in unfamiliar surroundings. The sense of nearness of the street or the countryside we know is a strong factor in the interest of the story. To the man who knows his Paris thoroughly, a Parisian crime may appeal, but to the woman who buys frocks in the Rue de la Paix and hats on the Boulevard des Italiens, the most diabolical murder in the Marais or on the heights of Belleville seems tame. Thus, the murder of a millionaire in the midst of the rich man's London was a crime that set every sensation seeker theorizing and arguing. Every man is, at heart, a Sherlock Holmes, while every woman thinks herself a criminal investigator by instinct, and the theories worked out and expounded over tea tables, and maintained with a red-hot intensity, were various and startling. The most sanguinary murder is a poor thing if people know how and by whom it was done. Mystery is essential in a crime that is to occupy the mind of the public. The murder in the great house in Portland Place had all the elements of enduring success: wealth, beauty, secrecy, and that Italian flavor which offered poignant possibilities of jealousy or revenge, or perhaps a lifelong vendetta as the motive of the crime. The inquiry in the coroner's court dragged slowly towards an indeterminate and unsatisfactory close, being adjourned at long intervals to give the police time to make discoveries. So far the police had made no discoveries, and the daily press was beginning to be angry with the Criminal Investigation Department, and to make uncivil comparisons between the Home article and the same thing in France and Germany. In the meantime, the newspapers found subject for occasional paragraphs, though they had no new facts to communicate. So long as the inquest went on, picturesque reporters found a spacious field for their pen in the descriptions of witnesses and spectators in the coroner's court, the spectators being mostly women of some fashion, and more or less famous in the world of art and letters. The stage also had been represented among that morbidly curious crowd, popular actresses coming to study the appearance and demeanor of the young widow, whose marble calm in the witness box had been written and talked about. But in spite of searching and patient inquiry, the murder in Portland Place remained an insoluble mystery, a standing reproach against Scotland Yard. While the man in the street and the daily papers he battens upon were expatiating upon the supineness and incompetency of the Criminal Investigation Department, the chief of that department was not idle. Scotland Yard is not greatly in favor of the offering of rewards for the apprehension of criminals. Scotland Yard has an idea that such offers do more harm than good, and prefers to rely upon the intelligence of its officials, and on that spontaneous and disinterested help which is often afforded by outsiders. But after the man in the street had expanded much wonder and indignation upon the fact that no reward had as yet been offered by the murdered man's widow or family, the Disbrowes had taken upon themselves to arouse Veera to a proper sense of her position and responsibilities. Among Provana's friends and allies in the city, the great semi-oriental banking house of Messrs. Zeba and Zalmunna, with whom he had been closely associated, and other firms almost as distinguished, there was also a feeling that strong measures were required, and some wonderment that the widow had as yet done nothing. Lady Okehampton, who had been in Portland Place nearly every day, although not always allowed to see her niece, took the matter in hand as spokeswoman for the Disbrowes, and told Veera that she must offer a reward for the apprehension of her husband's murderer. "It ought to have been done before now," she said, "but you have been so lost in grief that I've been afraid to talk of poor Provana. However, as time goes on, people must think it extraordinary that you can let things slide, especially after that splendid will which makes you the richest woman in London." The splendid will, executed in the first year of her marriage, left Veera residuary legatee, after a long list of legacies, which, although generous, did not absorb more than a sixth of Mario Provana's estate. If not actually the richest woman in London, a fact not easily to be ascertained, Veera was at least rich enough to support that reputation. She gave a little moan of anguish when her aunt spoke of the will, and replied with averted face that her uncle was to do whatever he thought right. Before darkness came down, the police stations of London exhibited bills offering £1,000 for information leading to the discovery of the murderer, and the man in the street was a little easier in his mind. In the meantime, Scotland Yard was pursuing its own course, and one of the most experienced and intelligent members of the force had the Provana affair in hand, and was actually established in Portland Place, where he was explained to the household as a picture restorer, who had been engaged by Mr. Provana shortly before he left England, to examine and restore certain pictures among those somewhat depressing examples of the early Italian school which gave gloom to the too spacious dining room. It might seem strange that work of this kind, ordered by the dead man, should be carried out at such a time, but Mr. James Japp of the Criminal Investigation Department had a power of impersonation which rarely failed him in the most critical circumstances, and having assumed the role of artistic man-of-all-work, he omitted no detail that could impress and convince the house servants, among whom he hoped to put his hand upon the murderer. Plausible, friendly, and altogether an acquisition in that low-spirited household, Mr. Japp, alias Johnson, was soon upon terms of cordial friendship with butler and housekeeper, while he was genially patronizing to the four stalwart footmen, and by no means standoffish to the coachman and his underlings, who sometimes crept into the servants' hall in the gloaming to talk over the last paragraph upon the mystery in Portland Place. For them, the mystery was meat and drink. They hung upon it with a morbid tenacity, never tired of restating the same facts and going over the same arguments and doing battle, each for his own solution of the ghastly problem. For these, Mr. Johnson, artist and picture restorer, was a godsend. The man was so delightfully innocent in the ways and workings of criminals. He showed the simple faith of a child when listening with avidity to Mr. Sedgwick's views, and allowed himself to be browbeaten by the coachman. He would turn the drift of the talk aside at a most interesting point to relate his early aspirations as a student, and his dismal failure as an artist, and how he had been driven from the painting of colossal historic pictures to the humbler art of the varnisher and restorer, working for a daily wage. He would tell stories of his early struggles that evolved laughter and good-natured scorn. He had a room allotted to him for his work, one of those rooms opening out of the long passage that led to Mr. Provana's private door, that door by which he and his murderer must have entered the house on the fatal night. Mr. Johnson had examined the door with studious attention, confessing to a morbid interest in the details of crime, coexisting with a curious ignorance of the law of the land. The nature and methods of a coroner's court had to be explained to him condescendingly by Mr. Sedgwick when the Provana murder was under discussion. He had his room for his artistic work, where he installed himself with 3 of the largest pictures from the dining room, his bottles of oil and varnish, and his stock of brushes, and where he insisted upon being undisturbed. He was of a nervous temperament, and could not bear to have his work looked at. He talked of his progress from day to day, expatiating upon the dangers of blue mold, the horrors of asphaltum, and other pernicious mediums, and the superiority of the old painters who ground their own colors. But no one, not even Mr. Sedgwick, was allowed to see him at work. He was altogether a superior person, yet it was something of a surprise to the household that he should be admitted every evening to an interview with Mrs. Provana, who received him in the great, lonely drawing-room where he remained with her for about a quarter of an hour, giving an account of his day's work. This privilege was explained by Mr. Johnson as a natural result of the lady's interest in art, and the value she set upon pictures which it appeared were especial favorites with her husband. "At the rate he goes at, I don't fancy he could have much progress to report," remarked Mr. Sedgwick, "for I don't believe he works a solid hour a day at those pictures. He takes things a bit too easily to my mind. He knows he's got a soft job, and he means to make it last as long as the missus will let him. He's got his head pretty well screwed on, has our friend Johnson, and he knows when he's in for a good thing, and he's got a tongue that would talk over a special commissioner of income tax, so no doubt he makes Mrs. Provana believe that he works heavens hard at fetching up the colour in the Fra Angelicas. I shall think something of his work if he can do anything to brighten up those Salvini roses, which are about the dismalest pictures I ever saw in a gentleman's dining room," the housekeeper remarked with conviction. Mr. Johnson was a desultory worker. He told his friends in the household that he worked like a tiger while he was at it, but your real artist was ever fitful in his toil. It was in the artistic temperament to be desultory. He would emerge from his den after an hour or so in a canvas apron so stained with oil and so sticky with varnish that none could doubt his industry. He was eminently sociable. He couldn't get on without company and conversation. The 4 young footmen afforded him inexhaustible amusement. "The oldest of 'em ain't over 25, he said, "but every one of 'em is a character in his way. Now I love studying character. There's no book, nor no illustrated magazine you can give me that I enjoy as I do human nature. Give me the human document, and leave your moldy old books for moldy old scholars. Every one of these 4 lads is a romance, if you know how to read 'em." This taste, which Mr. Sedgwick and Mrs. Manby thought low, led Mr. Johnson to consort in the friendliest way with the 4 youths in question. He had not been in the house a fortnight before he knew all about them, their sweethearts, their ambitions, their taste for pleasure, and their craving for gain. Even the odd man, a creature whom the elite of the household esteemed as hardly human, a savage without a livery, by whom it was a hardship to be waited on at one's meals, was not without interest for Johnson. While he delighted in Mr. Sedgwick's company, and was proud to spend an evening with him at his club, he shocked everybody by taking the old man to a music hall and giving him supper after the entertainment. "I think you're all too hard upon Andrew," he said. "I find him distinctly human." With the ladies of the household he was at once friendly and gallant. He aired his little stock of French with Mamselle, and took her for evening walks in Regent's Park, which to dwellers north of Langham Place is the park. He bought her little gifts, and took her to the theatre. He played dummy whist with Mrs. Manby, who was sadly behind the age and could not abide bridge, And the result of all this friendly intercourse, which had kept the establishment in good spirits during a period of gloom, culminated one evening when he told Mrs. Provana that his residence under her roof had only a negative result, and that he had exhausted all the means in his power without arriving at any clue to the murderer of her husband. "It has been a great disappointment to me, madam," said Mr. Japp, standing before Vera with his hat in his hand, serious and subdued in manner and bearing. The change from the sociable and trivial Johnson to the businesslike and thoughtful Japp showed a remarkable power in the assumption of character. "It has been a most disappointing case I have been engaged in for a long time. I came into this house assured that I should put my hand upon the guilty party under this roof. Every circumstance indicated that the crime had been committed by someone inside the house. The idea of an outsider seemed incredible. That a house with such a staff of servants, with 5 men and an Irish terrier sleeping on the ground floor, could have been entered by a burglar seemed out of the question. Mr. Provana being known to keep large sums of money in one shape and another in the safe in his private room, and no doubt being also known to carry the keys of that safe upon his person, there was a sufficient inducement for robbery. While it is our common experience that any man bold enough to attempt robbery on a large scale is not the man to shrink from murder when his own skin is in danger. My theory is that one of your men servants had been waiting for his opportunity during Mr. Provana's absence in America, that he had provided himself with implements for forcing the lock of the safe, perhaps with the aid of an outside accomplice, and that, by a strange coincidence, he had stumbled upon the night of his master's unexpected return and had been surprised at the beginning of his work. There are scratches on the polished steel about the lock of the safe that might be made by one of those graduated wedges which burglars use. I thought that, by being surprised by Mr. Provana's entrance, he snatched up one of the pistols from the case on the table, which he might have examined previously, and fired within narrow range as Mr. Provana was about to open the door of your room without having seen him, that he took the keys from Mr. Provana's pocket after he fell, unlocked the safe, and abstracted the 2 parcels of bonds which are missing. The disordered state of the safe and the keys left in the lock indicate that everything was done in extreme haste. This is my theory before I came into your house, madam. But after nearly 5 weeks' careful study of every individual under this roof, I have reluctantly arrived at the conclusion that nobody in your household is in it, either as principal or accomplice, before or after the fact. I think it is in an old play that the remark has been made that murder will out, also that blood will have blood. Both remarks are perfectly correct, but there is another remark that might have been made with even greater truth, and that is, money will out. You can't hide money. At least the average criminal can't. That's where he gives himself away. He can't keep his plunder to himself. The money burns. It burns. He must spend it. Some spend it on drink. Some, begging your pardon, madam, spend it on ladies. Some, the weakest of the lot, spend it on clothes and handsome cabs. But spend they must. There's not one of those 4 young men that could keep 5 or 6 thou in his pocket and not give himself away, somehow or somewhere. Nor yet Mr. Sedgwick, fine gentleman and philosopher as he is, nor yet even the odd man. Being a poor creature, he'd have melted those securities with the first low fence he could hear of, and would have been on the drink night after night till he got the horrors and gave himself up to the police. I've been looking for the money, madam, and finding no trace of that, I know I've not come within range of the party we want. We must look outside, madam, and we may have to look a long way off. If the possessor of those bonds is an old hand, he is not likely to turn them into money anywhere in this city, for though they are bonds to bearer, a transaction of that kind must leave some trace. I feel the humiliation of my failure, madam, and I have no doubt you are disappointed. Vera looked up at him with melancholy eyes, pale, hollow-cheeked, a sombre figure in the severest mourning that the Maison de Deuil near the Madeleine could supply, and French mourning knows no compromise. Disappointed, she repeated slowly in a low, tired voice. And then, to Mr. Japp's surprise and almost horror, she said, I don't think it much matters whether the wretched creature who killed him is discovered or not. It can make no difference to him lying at rest, beyond all pain and sorrow, that his murderer is hidden somewhere out of reach of the law, and may escape the agony of a shameful death. The horror in her widening eyes as she said these words showed that her imagination could realize the horror of the scaffold. However he may escape human law, she went on in the same slow, dull tones, he must carry his punishment with him to the grave. He can never know one peaceful hour. He can never know the comfort of a dreamless sleep. He will be a haunted man. Excuse me for differing with you, madam, but you don't know what stuff the criminal classes are made of. They don't mind. One more or less sent to kingdom come don't prey upon their nerves. Where are they found as a rule when they do get nicked? Why, at a theatre, or in a music hall, or at the Derby, and generally in ladies' society. The things you read of in novels, conscience, remorse, Banquo's ghost, don't trouble them. Mr. Japp apologized for having expressed himself so freely, and stood for a few minutes fingering the brim of his hat, waiting for Mrs. Provana to speak. Her speech just now had been a surprise to him, for never had he met with so silent a lady. Night after night she had listened hungrily to his statement of his day's progress, his suspicions, his glimpses of light, now seeming full of promise and anon delusive. She had listened with keen attention, but she had expressed no opinion and had asked no questions. And now for him, the accomplished criminal investigator, the man who had worked at the science of detection as superior persons work at the higher mathematics, to hear this lady say that the discovery of her husband's murderer did not matter, that, for her part, he might go about the world a free man, with nothing worse than a mind full of scorpions and a sleepless bed, seemed too monstrous for comprehension. She, to whom the murdered man had left millions, not to hunger for the ignominious death of his murderer? It must be Christian Science, thought Mr. Japp as he packed his portmanteau. Nothing less can account for it. End of chapter 15. Recording by Dylan Campbell.
Chapter 16 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter number 16. Everybody in the Red Book had left London. The West End was a desert, and the shrill summons of the telephone was heard no more in Mayfair. Nobody, unless it were the caretaker, was being asked to luncheon or dinner, and the only tea parties were in the basement, where the late lettuce had not yet given place to the early muffin. Only people with urgent and onerous business were to be found in London. Lord Okehampton was shooting grouse, and Lady Okehampton ought to have been doing an after-cure in Switzerland. But the sad state of my poor niece after her husband's ghastly death, and the legal business connected with her colossal inheritance, made it impossible for me to leave town. Much as I need a complete change, I must stay here while the poor child wants me. This was what Lady Okehampton wrote from her deserted house in Berkeley Square to numerous friends, with more or less variation of phrase. Vera's health was now the most pressing question. She had taken her bereavement with a dumb, self-contained grief that is the most morbid and the most perilous kind of sorrow, the sorrow that kills. When questioned, pressingly but tenderly, by her aunt, she always replied in the same unresponsive manner. There was nothing the matter with her. Of course, as Aunt Mildred said, the shock had been terrible, but no doubt she would get over it in time. People always get over things. She only wanted to be left to herself. She was quite strong enough to bear her burden. No, she was not eating her heart out in solitude. It was best for her to be alone. "You are more than kind, Aunt Mildred, and so is Susan Amphlett. But I am better sitting quietly and thinking out my life." "But my poor child, you are perishing visibly, just wasting away. I would rather see you in floods of tears, hysterical even, than in this hopeless state. What is the use of making a fuss? If tears could bring my husband back, and make life what it was before his death, I would drown myself in tears. But nothing can change the past. That is what makes life terrible. The things we have done are done forever." Lady Okehampton trembled, first for her niece's life, and next for her sanity. And here was the stupendous fortune left to Veera for her life, and to her children after her children by the husband who was dead, but, in default of such children, to be divided among a horde of Italian relations, third and fourth cousins, people for whom Mario Provana might not have cared twopence, and among Roman charitable institutions, surely to be badly managed, Lady Okehampton thought. It seemed to her that if Vera were to die, that stupendous wealth, which while she possessed it must be a factor in the position of the Disbrowes, would be absolutely thrown to the dogs. To divide that mass of riches into eighths and twelfths and sixteenths was in a manner to murder it. All its power and prestige would be gone, frittered away among insignificant people, who might be better off without it, as it would put a stop to laudable ambition and enterprise, and might ultimately be the cause of unmitigated harm. "It is so sad to think there were no children," sighed Lady Okehampton into the ears of various confidential friends. "The dear man made this will shortly after his marriage, and evidently built upon having a heir. He was so absolutely devoted to my niece. I know it was a bitter disappointment for him," concluded the chieftainess of the Disbrowes, to whom Mario Provana had said no word of his innermost feelings upon that or any other subject. Strange indeed would it have been for that strong hand to lift the curtain from that proud heart. Courteous, generous, chivalrous he might be to the whole clan of Disbrowes. He might scatter his gold among them with a careless hand, but to scatter the secrets of his lonely life among the frivolous herd was impossible to the man who endured a mother's dislike, a father's neglect, and the disillusions of a marriage de convenance, without 1 hour of self-betrayal. Vera was childless, and on her frail thread of life hung Mario Provana's millions. Lady Okehampton told herself this in the watches of the night, and told herself that something must be done. It was all very well for Vera to declare that there was nothing the matter with her, while it was visible to the naked eye that the poor child was fading away in an atrophy of mind and body. "She will either die or go mad," said Lady Okehampton, and the alternative offered visions of a conseil de famille, doctor's certificates, and that rabble of fourth and fifth cousins tearing their prey. Long and confidential talks with Mrs. Manby, the housekeeper, and Louison, the maid, had revealed the desperate state of their mistress's health. "No, my lady, she doesn't complain," asserted Mrs. Manby. "I'm afraid it's all the worse because she won't complain. But she can't sleep, and she can't eat. Sedgwick knows what her meals are like. Just pretending, that's all. And Louison says that, go into her mistress's room when she will, in the middle of the night or in the early morning, she's always lying awake, sometimes reading, sometimes staring at the sky above the window sash, but asleep, never. And it isn't for want of taking things, for she has tried every drug you can put a name to." "Does the doctor prescribe them?" "He used to send her things, in the first few weeks after the funeral, but she made him believe that she was quite well, and was sleeping and eating as usual, and he left off coming. And then Lady Susan Amphlett brought her tabloids, always the newest thing out, but they've never done her any good. It's the mind that's wrong, my lady." "She was absolutely devoted to Mr. Provana," sighed Lady Okehampton. "No doubt, my lady." and she can't get over her loss." "No, my lady." Susan Amphlett was of Aunt Mildred's opinion. Something must be done, and it must be done quickly, before any of those Roman cousins could appear upon the scene, prying and questioning, and hinting at a commission of lunacy. Things had come to a perilous pass, when Mrs. Manby, the housekeeper, could talk of her mistress's mind as the seat of the mischief. People who go out of their minds seldom take a long time about it, Lady Susan urged. "It's generally touch and go." Lady Okehampton waited for no permission, but marched into her niece's room one dark September afternoon with the fashionable nerve specialist at her heels, the bland elderly physician from Cavendish Square, whom nobody in Mayfair had ever heard of till he had entered upon his 70th decade, and who had languished at the wrong end of Harley Street for a quarter of a century, before the great world had made the remarkable discovery that he was one man in London who could cure one of everything. He was kind and sensible, and really clever, but the great world loved him most because he had all the new names for old diseases at the tip of his tongue, and had the delightful manner which implied that the patient to whom he was talking was the one patient whose life he considered worth saving. "He really does think about you when he's feeling your pulse," said a dowager. "He ain't totting up last night's winnings at bridge all the time. He does really think, don't you know?" Dr. Selwyn Tower, as he held Vera's wasted wrist in his broad, soft hand, looked as serious as if the fate of a nation were at stake. Indeed, he had been told that millions were in jeopardy, and in the modern mind the destinies of big fortunes are as serious as the rise and fall of peoples. The physician asked no troublesome questions, but he contrived to keep Vera in conversation, on indifferent subjects, for about a quarter of an hour, her aunt joining in occasionally with sympathetic nothings, and by the end of that time he had made up his mind about the case, or at least about his immediate treatment of the case. He might have thought that went deeper and farther, but those could be held in abeyance. The thing to be done was to save this fragile form, which was obviously perishing. A rest cure. Nothing else would be of any use. An uncompromising rest cure. 6 weeks of solitary confinement in the care of a resident doctor and a couple of highly trained nurses. Lady Okehampton anticipated a struggle, remembering how resolutely Vera had resisted this line of treatment 3 months before, but her niece surprised her by offering no vehement opposition. "There is absolutely nothing the matter with me," she said, "but if it will please you, Aunt Mildred, I will do as Dr. Tower advises." "Nothing the matter! And you neither eat nor sleep. Is that nothing?" "Who told you that I can't sleep?" "My dear lady, your eyes tell us only too plainly. Insomnia has unmistakable symptoms," said the doctor. "Yes, it is true," Vera answering wearily. "I seem to have lost the faculty of sleep. It is a habit one soon loses. I lie staring at the daylight, and wondering what it is like to lose count of time." And then, after a little more doctor's talk, soothing, and rather meaningless, she asked abruptly, "What time of year is it?" "Dear child!" exclaimed Lady Okehampton. "Can you ask?" "Oh, I have left off writing letters and reading newspapers, and I forget dates. I know the days are getting shorter, because the dawn is so long coming when I lie awake. We are in the middle of September, said the doctor, a charming month for country air, neither too hot nor too cold, the golden mean. And in 6 weeks it will be the end of October, and I can go to Rome for the winter. You could not do better. We shall build up your constitution in those 6 weeks. You will be another woman when you leave Sussex. But my dearest Vera, protested her aunt, you can never think of a winter alone in that enormous villa. You will die of ennui. No, no, Aunt Mildred. I love Rome. The very atmosphere of the place is life to me. I am not afraid of being alone. Dr. Tower shot a significant look at her ladyship, which silenced remonstrance, and no more was said. 2 days later Vera found herself on a windy hill in Sussex, under the dominion of the house doctor and 2 nurses, and almost as much exposed to the elements as King Lear on the heights near Dover. An eider-down coverlet and a hot water bottle made the only difference. Lady Okehampton, having sacrificed her own cure to her niece's, went with a mind at ease to join her husband in Yorkshire, an arrangement almost without precedence in their domestic annals. End of chapter 19. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter 17 of Beyond These Voices. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 17. Father Cyprian Hammond returned to his comfortable rooms in the northwest region one rainy autumn evening after a long day in the dreariest abodes of East London. He was almost worn out by the bodily fatigue of tramping through dismal streets with one of his friends and allies, a priest from the cathedral at Moorfields, and by the mental strain that comes from facing the inscrutable problem of human suffering, the mystery of sorrow and pain, inevitable, unceasing, beyond man's power to help or cure. He had visited the poor in great hospitals where every detail testified to the beneficence of the rich, yet he knew that the comfort and cleanliness of the hospital must needs accentuate the dirt and squalor of the slum to which the patient must return. He sank into his armchair with a sigh of relief, and was sorry to hear of a visitor who had called twice that afternoon and would call again after 9 o'clock. Did he leave his card? Yes, the card was there on the table. Mr. Claude Rutherford? Father Cyprian had not seen Claude since the opening day of that inquest which had been so often adjourned, only to close in an open verdict, and a mystery still unsolved. He had not seen Claude, but he had seen Mrs. Rutherford more than once in that quiet month when life in West End London seemed to come to a standstill. She had talked about her son as she talked only to him, opening her heart to the friend who knew all its secrets, the best and the worst of her. Hitherto she had never failed to find him interested and sympathetic, but in those recent interviews it had seemed to her that if the close friend of long years had changed, as if he was talking to her from a distance, as if some mysterious barrier had risen between them. She had told him of that conversation with her son. in which he had promised to confide in this old and trusted friend. That had happened more than a month ago, and the confidence had not yet come. Perhaps it was coming tonight. "I will see Mr. Rutherford at whatever time he calls," Father Cyprian told his servant. His dinner was short and temperate, but not ill-cooked or ill-served. He drank barley water, but the jug that held it was of old cut glass, picked up at a broker's shop at a back street for 7 shillings, and worth as many pounds. His silver was old family plate, his napery of the finest. It was past 9 when Claude Rutherford appeared, and the first thing Father Cyprian observed was that he was physically exhausted. He dropped into a chair with a long sigh of fatigue, and it was 3 or 4 minutes before he was able to speak. "I knew you would have finished your Spartan dinner by this time," he said, "but I hope I am not spoiling your evening." "You ought to know that I have nothing better to do with my evening than to talk with anyone who wants me," answered the priest in a low, grave voice that was like the sound of Hollmann's bow in an adagio passage. "And I think you must want me, or you would not come to this house a third time. What have you been doing since 6 o'clock? You look horribly fagged." "I have been to Hampstead. It is a fine night, and I wanted a walk." "You have walked too far. You are ill, Claude." "A little under the weather. The modern complaint neuritis, and its concomitant insomnia." "You ought to go to one of my neighbors in Harley Street." "No, I want you, the physician of souls. This corporal frame of mine will mend itself when I get out of London, 1,000 miles or so. Do you remember the night we walked home together from Portland Place? You pressed me very hard that evening. You tried to bring me back to the fold, but the time had not come." "And now the time has come?" questioned the priest, pushing aside the book that he had been reading, and bending forward to look into a page of human life, bringing his searching eyes nearer to the haggard face in front of him. "Yes, the time has come." "What is the matter?" "Oh, only the old disease, a more acute phase. The disgust of life, satiety, weariness of the world outside me, loathing of the world inside, the old disease in a virulent form. I want you to help me to the cure. It must be heroic treatment. Half measures will be of no use. I want you to help me to enter one of the orders that mean death to the world. Dominicans, Benedictines, La Trappe, anything you like. The harder the rule the better it may be for my soul." "This is strangely sudden." "Perhaps it is an inspiration. But no, my dear friend, not sudden. The complaint is chronic, and has been growing upon me for the last 10 years, ever since I found that I was a failure. That discovery is a crisis in man's life. He looks inside himself one day, and finds that the fire has gone out. It must all come to that. Life, mind, heart, all are contained in that central fire which is the soul of a man. While the fire burns he has hope, he has ambition, he has a future. When the fire goes out he has nothing but the past, the memory of things that were sweet and things that were bitter, nothing but memory to live upon in all the years that are to come. And he may live to be 90, a haunted man. I have done with the world, Father Cyprian. Am I to walk about like a dead man for 10 or 20 or 30 years? I have done with the world. I want to give the rest of my life to the God you and my mother believe in." You would not want to do that if you were not a believer. I was reared in the true faith. Yes, I believe. Help thou mine unbelieve. I will help you with all my heart, but I do not think you are of the stuff that Benedictine monks are made of, and it is a foolish thing to put your hand to the plough unless you have the force of mind to finish your furrow. I will finish my furrow. And break your mother's heart, perhaps. Your love is all she has in this life, except her religion. Her religion is no less a force than her love. My neglect of my duties has been a grief to her. She has never ceased to remonstrate with me, to remind me of my boyish ardor, my days of implicit faith. She wants to see you return to the faith and the obedience of those days, but it would distress her if you took a step that would mean separation from her. That would be inconsistent, after all her sermons. Women are apt to be inconsistent, even the best of them. In any case, even if my mother should object, which I think unlikely, I have made up my mind. I had time to commune with my soul in that 3 hours' walk through the darkness. I came to you this night fully resolved not to ask your advice as to the step, but your help in taking it. Where can I go? To whom can I submit myself? Frankly, Claude, I am too much in the dark to help you. Come to me at my church tomorrow morning after Mass, with your mind more at rest, and make your confession. Let me see into the bottom of your heart. I cannot talk to a man behind a mask. I can say nothing till I know all. No, I cannot do that. I must have time. I want solitude and a cell. I want to shake off the husk of the world that I have lived in too long. I want to be done with earthly desires. I shall have a new mind when I am in my woolen gown. Alas, Claude, I doubt. I doubt. Do you remember all we talked about when you were last in this room, a long time ago? Yes, I remember. You remember how I tried to awaken you to the danger of your relations with Mario Provana's wife? Those are things a man does not forget. You denied the danger, but you did not deny your love. You gave me your assurance, not as a priest, but between man and man, that no evil should ever come of that love. Yes, I remember. I was not afraid of myself. I belong to the great army of triflers and dilettanti. I am not of the stuff that passionate lovers are made of. But now death has intervened, and the situation is changed. 2 years hence, you might marry your cousin without shame to either, without disrespect to the dead. Are you capable of renouncing that hope by burying yourself in a cloister? Are you equal to the sacrifice? Would there be no looking back, no repentance? I shall never marry my cousin Veera. Because she does not love you? Is that the reason? No need to enter into details or to count the cost. I have made up my mind. For once in my life I have a purpose and a will. You seem in earnest. The words came slowly, like a spoken doubt, and the priest's searching eyes were on the pale face in front of him. The countenance wore the refinement of race. A long line of well-born men and women showed in every lineament. This sudden resolve of yours is inexplicable, the priest continued, in a troubled voice, after a silence that seemed long. It is not in your temperance or your manner of life, since you came into a man's inheritance, to cut yourself off from all that makes life pleasant to a young man with talent, attractiveness, and independence. I would give much to know your reason for such a step." "Haven't I told you, my dear friend? Welt Schmerz. Isn't that enough?" "No, it is not enough. Welt Schmerz is the chronic disease of a decadent age. If every sufferer from Welt Schmerz were to turn monk, this world would be a monastery. It is a phase in every man's life, or a pose. I know it is not that with you. There is something behind, Claude, something at the back of your mind, something that you must tell me, before I can be of any real help to you. But you are your mother's son, and you were steeped in sin. I would do my uttermost to help you. Come to me the day after tomorrow. I shall have had time to think over your case, and you will be in a better mood for considering the situation. To surrender this worldly life and all it holds is not a light thing that a man should do in a fit of the blues, a man still on the sunward side of 40. I, who have entered my 70th decade, have no yearnings for a woolen gown." "I have made up my mind," Claude repeated, in a dull, dead voice, the voice of an obstinate man. "Good night." End of chapter 17. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.
Chapter 18 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 18. The 6 weeks' captivity on the hill in Sussex had been a success, and Vera was able to leave England before the first November fog descended upon Portland Place. She was in Rome, in the city where she had spent the happiest period of her life, the time in which she had first known what it meant for a woman to be adored, and lovely, and immeasurably rich. There she had first known the power of wealth and the influence of beauty. For her husband's position and her own attractions had assured her an immediate social success, and had made her a star in Roman society during her first season, while, over and above all other graces, she had the charm of novelty. But it was not the memory of social triumphs or of gratified vanity that was with her as she sat alone in the too spacious saloon, or roamed with languid step through other rooms as spacious and as lonely. Sympathy had flowed in upon her from all her Roman acquaintances, and acquaintances of divers nationalities, the birds of passage, American, French, Spanish, German. Cards and little notes had descended upon the villa like a summer hailstorm, and she had responded with civility, but with no uncertain tone. Her mourning was to be a long mourning, and her seclusion was to be absolute. She had come to live a solitary life in her villa and gardens, to wander among ruins and steep herself in the poetry of the city. She had come not to the Rome of the present, but to the Rome of the past. This was how she explained her life to the officious people who wanted to force distractions upon her, and who in secret were already hatching matrimonial schemes by which the Provana millions might be made to infuse new life into princely races that were perishing in financial atrophy. The Villa Provana was on high ground, beyond the Porta del Popolo, and the view from the gardens commanded the roofs and towers and cupolas of the city, and the dominating mass of the great basilica, which dwarfs all other monuments and reduces papal Rome, with its heterogeneous roofs and turrets, steeples and obelisks, to a mere foreground for that one stupendous dome. Day after day, in those short winter afternoons, Vera stood on the terrace in front of the villa, leaning languidly against the marble balustrade, and watching the evening mists rising slowly over the city, and the grey of the great dome gradually deepening to purple, while the golden light in the west grew more intense, and orange changed to crimson. She was never tired of gazing at that incomparable prospect. How often in her honeymoon year she had stood there, with Mario Provana at her side, questioning him with a childish delight, and making him point out and explain every tower and every cupola, the classic, the papal, the old and the new, churches, palaces, public buildings, municipal and royal, picture galleries, museums, fountains. It was there, as an idolised young wife, with her husband's strong arm supporting her as she leant against him, in the pleasant fatigue after a day of pleasure, that she had learnt to know Rome, and that she had discovered how dearly the hard man of business loved the city of his birth. It was there he had told her what Victor Emmanuel and Cavour, the soldier and the statesman, had done for Italy, and how that which had been but a geographical expression, a patchwork of petty states, for the most part under foreign rulers, had become the name of a great nation in the van of progress. She thought of him now, evening after evening, in the unbroken silence and solitude of the long terrace on the crown of the hill, and only a little lower than the terrace on the Pincio. She looked backward across the arid desert of her 5 years of society under Disbrow influences, 5 years of life that seemed worthless and joyless compared with that year of a happiness she had almost forgotten, till her husband's death carried all her thoughts back to the past, to the time when she had given him love for love, to the days that she could think of without remorse. Oh God, if I had died at the end of that year, what a happy life mine would have been! She thought of the tomb on the Campagna, the splendid monument of her husband's love, near which she had sat in her carriage with Mario to watch the gathering of a gay crowd and the flash of red coats against the clear blue of a December day, the hounds trotting lightly in front of huntsman and whip, the women in their short habits, patent leather boots flashing against new saddles, men on well-bred hunters, the whole picture so modern and so trivial against the fortress tomb with its mystery of a distant past, only a name to suggest the story of 2 lives. If I had only died then, she thought. To have ended her life in that year of gladness, innocent, beloved, while all her world was lovely in the freshness of life's morning. To have died then, before the blight of disillusion or the taint of sinful thought had touched her. To have passed out of the world, beloved and worthy of love, and to have been laid to rest in the cemetery at San Marco, beside her girlfriend. Ah, what a happy destiny! And now what was to be her doom? A cold breath touched her as she leaned over the balustrade, with her hands clasped over her eyes, a cold breath that thrilled her and made her tremble. It was only the cooler wind of evening, breathing across the gathering shadows, but it startled her by the suggestion of a human presence. She rose from the marble bench where she had been sitting since the sun began to sink behind the umbrella pines on a hill in the distance, and while the far-reaching level of the Campagna began to look like the blue waters of a sea in the lessening light, and walked slowly back to the villa, by the long terrace, and under a pergola where the last roses showered their petals upon her as she passed. The lamps were lighted in the saloon, and logs were burning in the vast fireplace at the end of the room, a distant glow and brightness, a pleasing spot of colour in a melancholy picture, but of not much avail for warmth in a room of 50 feet by 25, with a ceiling 20 feet high. But the comfort of the villa was not dependent upon smouldering olive logs or spluttering pine cones. There was a hot water system, the most expensive and the best, for supplying all those palatial rooms with an equable and enervating atmosphere. There was a letter lying on Vera's book table, a table that always stood by her armchair at one side of the monumental chimney-piece. This spot was her own, her island in that ocean of space. This chair was large enough to absorb her, and when she was sitting in it, the room looked empty, and a servant had to come near her table before he could be sure she was there. She took up the letter and looked at the address wonderingly. It had not come by post. There was something familiar in the writing. It reminded her of Claude's, and then, in a moment, she remembered. The letter was from Mrs. Rutherford. Little notes had been exchanged between them in past years, notes of invitation from Vera, replies, mostly courteous refusals, from the elder lady. Mrs. Rutherford must be in Rome. Strange. Had she too come to winter there? My dear Vera, I hear you are at your villa, living in seclusion and refusing all visits. But I think you will make an exception for me, as it is vital for me to see you. I am in great trouble, and I want your help badly. I shall call on you at noon tomorrow. Pray do not shut your door against me. Yours affectionately, Magdalen Rutherford. The address was of one of the smaller and quieter hotels in the great city, a house unknown to the tourist, English or American, a house patronised only by what are called nice people. Trouble? What could be Mrs. Rutherford's trouble? Had she anything in this world to be glad or sorry about, except her son? The letter gave Vera a night of agitation and feverish dreams, and she spent the hour before noon pacing up and down the great room, deadly pale in the dense blackness of her long crape gown. It was not 5 minutes past the hour when Mrs. Rutherford was announced. She too was pale, and she too wore black, but not mourning. "You are kind to let me see you," she said, clasping Vera's hand. "How could I refuse? I am so sorry you are in trouble. Is it—" her voice became tremulous. "Is it anything about Claude? Is he ill?" "No, he is not ill, unless it is in mind. But the trouble is about him, a new and unexpected trouble. A thunderbolt." The terror in Vera's face startled her. She thought the frail figure would drop at her feet in a dead faint, and she caught her by the arm. "I think you may help me. You and he were great friends. Pals, Susan Amphlett called you." "Yes, we were pals. He was so good to me at Disbrowe, years and years ago." "Yes, I know. He has often talked of that time. Well, you were great friends, and a young man will sometimes open his mind more to a woman friend than he will to his mother. Did Claude ever talk to you of his church, of his remorse for his neglect of his religion, of his wanting to give up the world, to end a useless life in a monastery?" "Never." "I thought not. It is a sudden caprice. There is no real strength of purpose in it. He is disgusted and disappointed. He has made a failure of his life, and he is angry with himself and sick to death of society. Such a man cannot go on being trivial forever. A life without purpose can but end in disgust. my poor child, you are shivering and can hardly stand. Let us go nearer the fire. Sit down and let us talk quietly. And be kind, and bear with a foolish old woman who sees the joy of her life slipping away from her." The visitor's quick eye had noticed the great armchair and book table by the hearth, and knew that it was Vera's place. She led her there, made her sit down, and took a chair by her side. "Now we shall be warm and comfortable, and can look my trouble in the face." "Tell me all about it," Vera said quietly, with her hand in Mrs. Rutherford's. The wave of agitation had passed. She spoke slowly, but her voice was no longer tremulous. "I dare say, if you have ever thought of me in the past, you have given me credit for being a strong-minded woman." "Claude has told me of your strength of will, the right kind of strength." "And now I have to confess myself to you as weak, unstable, inconsistent, caring for my son's love for me more than I care for his eternal welfare." "No, no, I can never believe that." "But you will believe it when I tell you that he has taken the first step towards separating himself for ever from this sinful world, and giving the rest of his life to God, and that I am here in this city, here pleading with you to try to change his purpose and win him back to the world."
"Oh," said Vera with a faint cry. "Has he made up his mind?"
"He thinks he has. But oh, what shall I do without him? It is horrible, selfish, unworthy, but I can only think of myself and my own desolate old age. Only a few years more, perhaps, only a few years of solitude and mourning. But my mind and heart rise in rebellion against fate. I cannot bear my life without him. Again and again I have urged him to remember the faith in which he was reared. I have tried to awaken him to the call of the Church. I have begged Father Hammond to use his influence to rekindle the fervour of religion that has made my son's boyish mind so lovely. And now, when he has gone beyond my prayers and wants to renounce this sinful world, I am a weak, miserable woman, and my despairing cry is to call him back to the life he has grown weary of. Do you not despise me, Vera?"
"No, no, I can understand. It is natural for a mother to feel as you feel. But, all the same, I think if he has made up his mind to retire into a monastery, it is your duty to let him go. Think what it is for a man to spend his last years in reconciling himself with God. Think of the peace that may come with self-sacrifice. Think what it is to escape out of this sinful world into a place of silence and prayer, and to know that one's sins are forgiven."
"He has no sins that need the sacrifice of half a life. He has been the dearest of sons, the kindest of friends, honourable, generous, straightforward. Why should he shut himself in a monastery to find forgiveness for trivial sins and neglect of religious forms? He can lead a new and better life in the world of action, where he can be of use to his fellow men. Even Father Hammond has never advised him to turn monk. He can worship God and lead the Christian life without renouncing all that is lovely in the world God made for us."
Vera listened with a steadfast face, and her tones were calm and decided when she replied, "Dear Mrs. Rutherford, the heart knoweth its own bitterness. I think the better you love your son, the less you should come between him and a resolve that must give him peace, if it can never give him happiness." For the first time since Mrs. Rutherford had been with her, Vera's eyes filled with tears, tears that overflowed and streamed down the colourless cheeks, and that it needed all her strength to check.
"You surprise me!" the elder woman cried passionately, flinging away the hand that she had been holding. "You surprise me! I came to you for sympathy, sure that I should find it, believing that you cared for my son almost as much as I care for him. You were his chosen friend. He devoted half his days to you. The closeness of your friendship made malicious people say shameful things, and has given me many an unhappy hour. And now, at this crisis of his life, when he is bent upon burying himself alive in a monastery, entering some severe order, for whose rule of hardship and deprivation he is utterly unfit, a kind of life that will break his heart and bring him to an early grave, you preach to me of his finding peace in those dreary walls. Peace, as if he were the worst of sinners. No, you don't understand me. Father Hammond has told me about the monastic life, the Benedictines, La Trappe. He has told me what happiness has been found in that life of solitude and prayer by those who have renounced the world. Was it you who inspired this extraordinary resolve? I? No, indeed. I knew nothing of it till you told me. What? He could take such a step without consulting you, without confiding in you, his closest friend? Was it likely that he would tell me if he did not tell his mother? He told me nothing till he had come here, to make a retreat in a monastery, to give himself time for meditation and thought before he took any decisive step. He is here in Rome, and has been here for some time. My first knowledge of his decision was a letter he sent me from here. Such an unsatisfactory letter, giving no adequate reason for his resolve, only vague words about his weariness of life and the world. What else could he say? That must always be the reason. One gets tired of everything, and then one turns to God, and a life of prayer seems best. It is death in life, but it may mean peace. Veera, I was never more shocked and disappointed. I thought you loved him when love was sin. I thought you loved him at the peril of your soul. And now, when a terrible calamity has left you free to do what you like with the rest of your life, now, when however deeply you may mourn for your husband's awful death, and grieve over any sins of omission in your married life, yet there must needs be the far-off thought of years to come, when, without self-reproach, you may give yourself to a lover who in years and temperament would be your natural companion. There has been no such thought in my mind, Veera said coldly. I shall never cease to mourn for Mario Provana's death. I have nothing else in the world to live for. My poor girl, it is only natural that you should feel like that. I did wrong to speak of the future. You have passed through a horrible ordeal, and it may be long before you can forget. But you are too kind not to be sorry for a mother who is threatened with the loss of all that she has of joy and comfort in this world. I am very sorry for you, Veera said with a mechanical air, as if her thoughts were far away. Then you will help me? Mrs. Rutherford cried eagerly. How can I help you? You can appeal to my son. You may have more influence over him than I. I believe you have more influence, with a touch of bitterness. However indifferent you may be, and may have always been to him, I know that he was devoted to you, that you could have led him if you had cared to lead him. And he will listen to you now. He will have pity upon me if you plead for me, if you tell him what it is for a mother to part with a son of nearly 40 years' cherishing, who represents all her life on earth, past, present, and to come. I cannot live without him, Veera. I thought that I was strong in faith, and patience, and resignation, till this trouble came upon me. I thought that I was a religious woman, but now I know that the God I worshipped was of clay, and that when I prayed and tried to lift my thoughts to heaven, it was only of my son that I thought, only for his welfare that I prayed. Help me, Vera, if you have a heart that can love and sympathise with another's love. Plead with him. Tell him how few the years are for a woman of my age, and that there will be time enough for him to bury himself alive in a monastery when I am at rest. His dedication of those later years will not be less precious in the sight of God, because he has deferred the sacrifice for his mother's sake. I cannot think that he will listen to me, if he has not yielded to you. I know he loves you dearly. He did love me. Never was there a better son. But he changed all at once. It was as if something had broken his life. But I think you can melt his heart. He will understand my grief better when it is brought home to him by another. I am to see him tomorrow afternoon, and I shall be allowed to take you with me. Will you come?" The entreaty was so insistent, so agonizing, that Vera could only bend her head in mute acquiescence. Mrs. Rutherford threw her arms round the frail figure and strained it to her breast. "My dearest girl, I knew you would have pity upon me. I will call for you tomorrow at 2:30. The house is on the hill, beyond the Medici villa, a lovely spot, but to me, though it is only a place of probation, it seems like a grave. Vera," with a sudden passion, "if I thought that this step were for his happiness, I believe I could submit. But when I parted with him last week, his face was the face of despair. How changed, oh my God, how changed." End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of Beyond These Voices. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 19. Mrs. Rutherford and Vera drove to the hill behind the Medici villa in the golden light of a Roman November, when the gardens on the height were glowing with foliage that seems made of fire, and only cypress and ilex showed dark against the splendour of red and amber. But to those two women all the beauty of autumn colour and purple distances, of fairy-like gardens and flashing fountains, was part of a world that was dead. The metaphysician's idea of the universe as an emanation of the individual mind is so far borne out by experience that in a great grief the universe ceases to exist. The room to which one of the brotherhood led them faced the western sky and was full of golden light when the two women entered. It was a room that had once been splendid, but of all its splendour nothing was left but vast space, and the blurred and faded outlines of a fresco upon the ceiling. The two women stood within the doorway, looking to the other end of the room, where a solitary figure was sitting, huddled in a large armchair, in front of a fireplace that looked like an open tomb, where a little heap of smouldering logs upon a spacious hearth seemed a hollow mockery of a fire meant for warmth. That crouching form with contracted shoulders and wasted hands stretched above the feeble fire glow. Could that be Claude Rutherford? Vera shivered in the chillness of the dismal scene, where even the vast window and the golden west could not relieve the sense of cold and gloom. Yes, it was Claude. He started to his feet as Mrs. Rutherford moved slowly along the intervening space. He looked beyond her, surprised at the second figure, and then, with one brief word to his mother, hurried past her and came to Vera. He clasped her hands. He drew her towards the window, drew her into the golden light, where she stood transfigured, like the Madonna in a picture by Fra Angelico, glorious and old gold. He looked at her as a traveller who had been dying of thirst in a desert might look at a fountain of clear water. It was a long, long look, in which it seemed as if he were drinking the beauty of the face he looked at; as if, in those moments, he tried to satisfy the yearning of days and nights of severance. It seemed as if he could never cease to look, as if he could never let her go. Then suddenly he dropped her hand, and turned from her to his mother, who was standing a little way off. "Why have you done this?" he asked vehemently. "Because you would not listen to me. No prayers, no tears of mine would move you. I was breaking my heart, and I thought she might prevail when I failed. I knew her influence over you, and that she might move you. It was a cruel thing to do. I knew she was in Rome, that we were breathing the same air. The thought of her was with me by day and night. Yet I was rock. I made myself iron. I clung to the cross, like the saints of old time, who had all been sinners. Vera, why have you come between me and my God?" "I could not see your mother so unhappy and refuse to do what she asks. Oh, Claude, forget that I came here. Forget that we have ever clasped hands since you resolved to separate yourself from the world. I will not come between you and the saving of your soul." "Vera," Mrs. Rutherford cried passionately, "have you no compassion for me? Is this how you help me? You know that I refused, that I did not want to see him. I ought never to have come. But it is over. We shall never meet again, Claude. This is the last, the very last." "Heartless girl, have you no thought of my grief?" urged the mother. "No, not when I think of him. If you can come between him and his hope of heaven, I cannot." She turned and walked quickly to the door without another word. Mrs. Rutherford cast one despairing look at her son before she followed the vanishing figure, muttering, "Cruel, cruel, a heart of stone." No words were exchanged between the two women as they left the monastery, conducted by the monk, who had waited for them in the stony corridor at the top of the broad marble stairs. He let them out of the heavy iron lined door, into the neglected garden, where a long row of cypresses showed dark against a saffron sky. The greater part of the garden had been utilized for growing vegetables upon which the brotherhood for the most part subsisted. Huge orange red pumpkins sprawled among the beds of kale, and patches of Indian corn were golden amidst the rusty green of artichokes gone to seed. It was a melancholy place, and the aspect of it sent an icy chill through Mrs. Rutherford's heart as she thought of that light, airy temperament which had been her son's most delightful gift, the gay insolence, the joyous outlook that had made him everybody's favourite. He the jester, the trifler, for whom life was always playtime; he to be shut within those frozen walls, immured in a living grave. It was maddening even to think of it. She had talked to him of his religious duties. O God, was it her old woman's preaching that had brought him to this living death? Vera bade her good bye at the gate, saying that she would rather walk than drive, and left Mrs. Rutherford to return to her hotel alone. "I wonder which of us two is the more unhappy?" she thought. "Why do I wonder? What is her misery measured against mine? For Claude, a night of fever followed that impassioned meeting, a night of sleeplessness and semi delirium. For the first time since he had been a visitor in that house of gloom, he got up at 2 o'clock and went to the chapel, where the monks met for prayer and meditation at that hour. As a probationer making his retreat, he was not subject to the severe rules of the order, and he need not leave his bed till 4 o'clock unless he chose. This night he went to the dimly lighted chapel and knelt on the chill stone for respite from agonizing thoughts, from the insidious whispers of the tempter. This night he went into the house of God to escape from the domination of Satan. Hitherto he had borne his time of probation with a stoical submission. He had sought no relaxation of the rule for penance on the threshold. He had lain upon the narrow bed and shivered in the chilly room, and risen in the winter dark, to lie down again sleepless at an hour when a little while ago his night of pleasure would have been still at full tide. He had submitted to the repellent fare, the vegetables cooked in half rancid oil, coarse bread and gritty coffee. He who had been always a creature of delicate habits, accustomed to the uttermost refinement in every detail of daily life, his food, his toilet, his surroundings. He had shrunk from no burden that was laid upon him, earnestly intent upon keeping his promise to Father Hammond. He was to spend 6 weeks in this place of silence and prayer, and at the end of that time he was to make his confession to the Superior, and to make his communion. Then would follow the slow stages of preparation for the final act, which would admit him to the brotherhood, and shut the door of the world upon all the rest of his life. He had learnt to think of that awful change with a stoic's resignation. He had brought himself to a Roman temper. He thought with indifference of the world which he was to renounce. He had done with it. This had been the state of his mind as he shivered over the smouldering olive logs. This iron calm, and his stony contempt for life, had been his till that moment of ecstasy when the woman he loved stood before him, a vision of ethereal beauty in the light of the setting sun. Why had she come there? Why? The penitential days and nights, the stoic's iron resolve, all were gone in one breath from those sweet lips, faint and pale, but ineffably beautiful. End of chapter 19. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter number 22 of Beyond These Voices. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 22. It was a little less than 3 weeks after the meeting in the House of Silence, but to Veera the interval seemed an endless procession of slow, grey days, and fevered nights, nights of intolerable length, in which she listened to the beating of the blood against her skull, now slow and rhythmical, now tempestuous and irregular, endless nights in which sleep seemed the most unlikely thing that could happen.
a miracle for which she had left off hoping. In all that time she had heard no more of Mrs. Rutherford, though the daily chronicle that kept note of every stranger in Rome still printed her name among the inmates of Hotel Margarita. She was angry and unforgiving. Unhappy mother! Unhappy son! 2 pairs of horses had to be exercised daily, but Vera had no orders for the stables. The monotonous parade in the Pincio, which every other woman of means in Rome made a part of her daily life, had no attraction for Signor Provana's wife. The villa gardens, funereal in their winter foliage of ilex and arbutus, sufficed for relief from their long hours within 4 walls. Wrapped in her sable coat, with the wind blowing upon her uncovered head, she paced the long terraces for hours on end, or sat like a statue on the marble bench that had been dug out of the ruins of imperial baths. But though she spent half her days in the gardens, she took no interest in them. She never stopped to watch the gardeners at work upon the flower beds, never questioned them about their preparations for the spring. Thousands of bulbs were planted daily, but she never wanted to learn what resurrection of vivid colors would come from those brown balls which the men were dropping into the earth. She walked about like a corpse alive. The men almost shrank from her as she passed them, as if they had seen a ghost. She could never forget that last meeting with her lover. The last, the very last. She sat with her arms folded on the marble balustrade, and her head resting on the folded arms, with her face hidden from the clear, cold light of a December afternoon. Her gaze was turned inward, and it was only with that inward gaze that she saw things distinctly. The outside world was blurred and dim, but the pictures memory made were vivid. She saw Claude's agonized look, saw the melancholy eyes gazing at her, the yearning love, the despairing renunciation. Mrs. Rutherford had called her cruel, but was not the cruelty far greater that submitted her to that heart-rending ordeal? To sit brooding thus, with her arms upon the cold marble, had been so much a habit with her of late, that in these melancholy reveries she had often lost count of time, till the sound of some convent bell startled her as it told the lateness of the hour, or till the creeping cold of sundown awoke her with a shiver. In that city of the church there were many bells, all with their particular call to prayer, and she could have told the progress of the day and night without the help of a clock. Now it was the bell of the Trinita de Monte, for the office of benediction, distant and silvery sweet in the clear air. It was a warning to go back to the house. Yet she did not stir. Solitude here, with the cold wind blowing up upon her, and the twitter of birds among the branches, was better than the atmosphere of those silent rooms. She raised her head at the sound of a footstep, not the leisurely tread of one of the gardeners, heavy and slow. This step was light and rapid, so rapid that before she had time to wonder, it had stopped close beside her, and 2 strong arms were holding her, and quick, sobbing breath was fluttering in her hair. "Don't be frightened, Vera, my angel, my beloved." She tried to release herself, tried to stand upright, but the passionate arms held her to the passionate heart. "Claude, are you mad?" "No, madness is over. Sanity has come back. I am yours, my beloved, yours as I was that night, before a great horror parted us. I am all your own, your lover, your husband, whatever you will. The miserable slave you saw in the monastery is dead. I am yours, and only yours. I have no separate existence. I want no other heaven. Heaven is here in your arms. Nothing else matters." "My God! Have you left the monastery?" "Forever. I bore it till last night. But that was a night of hell. I told the Superior this morning that I was not of the stuff that makes a martyr or monk. He was horrified. To him I seemed a son of the devil. Well, I will worship Satan sooner than lose you. I am your lover, Vera. Nothing else in this sublunary world. We'll jump the life to come." She clung to him in the ecstasy of reunion, and their lips met in a kiss more tragic than Francesca's and Paolo's, for their guilt was yet to come, while with Vera and her lover guilt had been consummated. Presently, with a sudden revulsion, she snatched herself from his arms and stood looking at him reproachfully. "Oh, my dearest, why did you not stand firm? Think how little this poor life of ours means compared with that which comes after. Think how much this poor life of ours means compared with that which comes after. I leave the afterlife to the illuminated, to Simon and his following. I want nothing but the woman I love, here or hereafter. For me there is nothing else. Vera, forget that I ever tried to forsake you, that I ever set my soul's ransom above my thoughts of you. It was a short madness, a cowardly endeavor. Forget it all, as I shall from this hour. Here you are and I, in the little world which is the only one we know. Just with just a few more years of youth and love. Let us make the most of them, and when the fire of life dies down, when these fierce heart throbs are over, we will give our fading years to penance and prayer. We will give our fading years to penance and prayer. This is what happens when a man of Claude Rutherford's temperament puts his hand to the plow. End of chapter 20. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter 21 of Beyond These Voices. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter 21. Just 2 years after the sudden close of Mr. Rutherford's retreat, there was a quiet wedding in Father Hammond's chapel. A bride without bridesmaids, a marriage without music, a bride in a pale grey gown and a black hat, with just a sprinkling of the Disbrowe clan to keep her in countenance. 3 stately aunts, Lady Okehampton being by far the most human of the 3, and their 3 noble husbands, with Lady Susan Amphlett, vivacious as ever and immensely pleased with her friend. From a conversational point of view she had been living upon this marriage all through the little season of November fog and small dinner parties at restaurants or at home. She knew so much more than anybody else, and what she knew was what everybody wanted to know. She discussed the subject at Ritz's, at Claridge's, at the Savoy, at the Carlton, and seemed to have something fresh to say at each place of entertainment. There was more variety in her information than even in the hors d'oeuvres, which rise in a crescendo of novelty in unison with the newness of the hotel. People wondered they had not married sooner, since, of course, everybody knew it must end in marriage. Susie shrugged her pretty shoulders, and flashed her diamond necklace at the company. The sweet thing is exaltée. She is one of Francis Symeon's flock, and she thought respect for her husband obliged her to wait 2 years. She only left off her mourning last week. But considering that she was carrying on with Rutherford years before Provana's death, you none of you understand her. Their friendship was purely platonic. She and I were like sisters, and I was in and out of her house just as Claude was. There never was a more innocent attachment. I used to call them Paul and Virginia." "I should think Paolo and Francesca would be more like it," murmured one of the company. Susie shook her fan at him. "You men will never believe in a virtuous friendship. However, there they are, absolutely devoted to each other. They will be the happiest couple in London, and they mean to entertain a great deal." "Then I hope they are on the lookout for a pearl among chefs. People won't go to Portland Place to eat second rate dinners." Provana's dinners were admirable, and his wines the finest in London. Then there came the question of settlements. How much of her millions had Mrs. Provana settled upon Rutherford? "I don't think there has been any settlement." "The more fool he," muttered a matter of fact guardsman. "What's the use of marrying a rich woman if you don't get some of the stuff?" "Don't I tell you they are like Paul and Virginia?" said Susie. The Provana murder had died out long before this as a source of interest and wonder. It had flourished and faded like a successful novel or play that takes a town by storm one year and is forgotten the year after. The Provana mystery has gone to the dust heap of old things. Slowly and gradually people had resigned themselves to the knowledge that this murder must take its place among the long list of crimes that are never to be punished by the law. Romantic people clung to their private solutions of the tragical enigma. These were as sure of the identity of the murderer as if they had seen him red-handed. The quiet marriage in the Roman Catholic chapel revived the interest in the half-forgotten crime, and Lady Susan had the additional kudos of a close association with the event. "Vera and I were together at Lady Fulham's ball, within 2 or 3 hours of that poor fellow's death," she told her friends at the Savoy supper table. "I never saw her look so lovely in one of her mermaid frocks, and a neckline and girdle of single diamonds that flashed like water drops. Other people's jewels looked vulgar compared with hers. She was in wonderful spirits, stayed late, and danced all the after supper waltzes. She was fey." "Rutherford was there, of course?" said someone. "Of course," echoed Susan. "Why shouldn't he be there? Everybody was there." "But everybody couldn't waltz or sit out with Madame Provana all the evening, as I heard he did," remarked a middle-aged matron, fixing Susan with her long-handled eyeglass. "Why shouldn't they waltz? They are cousins, and have always been pals, and they waltz divinely. To watch them is to understand what Shakespeare meant by the poetry of motion. Everything Vera does is a poem. Every frock she wears shows that she is a poet's daughter. And now they are married, and are going to be utterly happy," concluded Susie with conviction. The world in general does not relish that idea of idyllic happiness, especially in the case of multimillionaires. It is consoling, when one is not a millionaire, to think of some small counterbalance to that overweening good luck, some little rift within the lute. A cynic, as cold and sour as the aspic he was eating, shrugged his shoulders. "If I had a daughter I was fond of, I don't think I would trust the chances of her happiness to Claude Rutherford," he said quietly. "Claude is quite adorable," said a 14-stone widow, whose opulent shoulders and triple necklaces had been the centre point of the public gaze at the theatre that evening. "Much too adorable to make one woman happy. A man of that kind has to spread himself. It might be diffused light, not the concentrated glow of the domestic hearth," said the cynic, smiling at the bubbles in his glass. Everybody found something to say about Vera and her husband. Certainly their behavior since Provana's death had been exemplary. They had never been seen about together, at home or abroad. The house in Portland Place had been closed, and the widow had lived in Italy, a recluse, seeing no one. Half the time had been spent by Claude Rutherford in Africa, hunting big game with a famous sportsman, the other half in well-known studios in Antwerp and Paris. He had thrown off his lazy, dilettante habits, and had gone in for art with a curious renewal of energy. The man was altered somehow. His own acquaintance discovered a change in him, a change for the better, most likely, though they did not all think so. And now he had attained the summit of moral bliss, as possible to a man of 39, who had wasted the morning of his life. He had won a lovely woman whom he was supposed to adore, and whose wealth ought to be inexhaustible. "However hard he tries, I don't see how he can run through such a fortune as that," his friends said. "That kind of quiet, unpretentious man has often a marvelous facility for getting rid of money," said another. "It oozes out of his pockets without the labor of spending. Rutherford is sure to gamble. A man of that temperament is too idle to find excitement for himself. He wants it ready made, at the baccarat table, or on the turf. Well, it will last him a few years, at the worst, and then he can go into the Charterhouse." The idea of Claude Rutherford going to bed at 10 o'clock in the Charterhouse made everybody laugh. The long interval of mourning and probation, of melancholy solitude on Vera's part, and of forced occupation on Claude's, was over, and they two, who in thought and feeling had been long one, were now united in that closer bond which only death or sin can sever. In the intensity of the union it seemed to them as if they had never lived as if all of their existence that had gone before were no more than a long, dull dream, the grey monotony of life that was less than life, hard and mechanical, even in its so-called pleasures. "I never lived till now," she told him, when she was folded to his heart, in their sumptuous alcove in the great room in Venice, in an hotel that had been a palace, an alcove surrounded with a balustrade, a bed that had been made for a king. I never lived till now, for now I know that nothing can part us. We belong to each other till death. If it were now to die, 'twere now to be most happy," he murmured, in a low, impassioned voice that soothed her like music. "And the past is dead," she whispered. "The past is dead." The voice that echoed her words had changed. The winter moonlight set a flood of cold light across the shining floor, and the glow of burning logs on the hearth glimmered redly under the sculptured arch of the Byzantine fireplace. It was a wonderful room in a wonderful city. Vera had never been in Venice till this night, when she stepped from the station quay into the black boat that was to bring them to the hotel, man and maid and luggage following in a second gondola. To most travelers so arriving, Venice must needs seem a dream city, but to Vera all life had been a dream since she stood before the altar and heard Father Hammond's grave voice pronounce the words that made her Claude's wife. She had chosen Venice for their honeymoon, because it was one famous city in her beloved Italy in which she had never been with Provana. "It will be all new and strange," she told Claude, and then came the unspoken thought, "He will not be there." He had been with her in Rome, almost an inseparable companion, until she had grown accustomed to the thought that he must be with her always, whenever she went, an inseparable shadow; but with her marriage the bond that held her to the past was broken. The shadow was lifted. She was young again, young and thoughtless, living in the exquisite hour, almost happy as she had been when she was an impulsive, light hearted child of 11, leaping on to her cousin's knee, and nestling with her arms round his neck, while they watched the waves racing towards the rock where they were sitting, she rather hoping that the waters would rise round them and swallow them. That blue brightness could hardly mean death. They would only become part of the sea, merman and mermaid, children of the ocean. How much better than to return to the dull lodgings, and Lidcott's harsh dominion! That solitude of two in the loveliest city in Europe seemed altogether of the stuff that dreams are made of. They kept no count of the days and hours. They made no plan for to morrow. They wandered along the Call, and in and out of the churches, in a desultory and casual way, looking at pictures and statues without any precise knowledge of what they were seeing, only a dreamy delight in things that were beautiful themselves, and which awakened ideas of beauty. They spent idle days in their gondola going from island to island, musing among the historic arches of Torcello, or sauntering along the sands of the Lido. The winter was mild even in England, and here soft air and sunshine suggested April rather than December. It was a delicious world, and in the seclusion of a gondola, or in the half light of a church, they seemed to have this lovely world all to themselves. They were very strangers in Venice at this season, and the residents had something more to do than to wander about the narrow Call, or loiter and look at things in the churches, or the Doge's Place. These two were learning Venice by heart in those leisurely saunterings, a little listless sometimes, as of people whose lives had come to a dead stop. They never talked of the past, or only of that remote past when Vera was a child. the time of childish happiness by the blue waves and the dark cliffs of North Devon. They talked very little of the future. Their talk was of themselves and of their love. They read Byron and Shelley and Browning and de Musset. They drank deep of the poetry that Venice had inspired, until every stone in the city of dreams seemed enchanted, and every noble old mansion, given over perhaps now to commerce, glass blowers, and dealers in bric a brac, seemed a fairy place. They drained the cup of life and love. Claude forgot that he had ever thought of the woollen gown and the hempen girdle. Vera forgot that she had ever seen him, haggard and hollow eyed, crouching over the smouldering olive logs in the monastery on the Roman hill. Early on their wedding journey, leaning against the side of the boat, hand locked in hand, they had sworn to each other that all the past should be forgotten. Come what come might, in unknown fate, they would never remember. And now they were going back to London in the gay spring season, and Lady Susan Amphlett had other innings. had another innings. It was delicious to be moving about in a world where everybody wanted to know things that only she could tell them. And are they really going to live in the house in Portland Place? Really, really? Where could they get such rooms, such air and space? And that old Italian furniture is priceless. There is nothing better in the Doria Palace. It took the Provana family more than a century to collect it, even with their wealth. Well, when I saw the painters at work outside, I thought the house must have been sold. This world seems full of strange people. How Vera can reconcile herself to live in that house passes my comprehension. I could understand her keeping the furniture, but to live inside those four walls, I should fancy they were closing in upon me, like a medieval torture chamber. Vera is all poetry and imagination, but she is not morbid. Vera knows that we are in the midst of the unseen, and that our dead are always near us," said a thrilling voice, and Lady Fanny Ransom's dark eyes flashed across the table. "The house can make no difference to her. If she loved her first husband she has not lost him." "Nice for her, but not so pleasant for the second," murmured a matter of fact K.C. "She was utterly devoted to poor Provana," protested Susie, "but it was the reverent looking up kind of love that an innocent girl feels for a man old enough to be her father. She has told me the story of their courtship. So sweet, like Paul and Virginia." "A middle-aged Paul? I thought Rutherford was the hero of the Paul and Virginia chapter of her history." "Oh, well, they were little lovers as children, and Vera and Claude are the most ideal couple that ever the world has seen. They are going to entertain in a sumptuous style. Their house will be the most popular in London." "In spite of its being the scene of an unsolved mystery and undiscovered crime. That's the worst of it," said sour middle age in a garnet necklace. "For my part, I could never sleep a wink in that awful house." "Ah, but you'll be able to eat and drink in it," remarked Mr. Hortensius, K.C., dryly. "We shall all dine there, if the dinners are good as they were in poor Provana's time." "Poor Provana!" That was his epitaph in the world. On the marble tomb at St. Marco, to which the dead man had been carried, in remembrance of a desire expressed in those distant days when he and Vera wandered in the olive woods, There was nothing but his name and one word, reunited. Vera had been too ill and too much under the dominion of Lady Okehampton to make the dismal journey with her dead, but she now had gone from Rome to San Marco, and spent a melancholy hour in that secluded corner where the cypress cast its long shadow on Guilia's tomb. She had stood by the tomb in a kind of stupor, hardly conscious of the present, lost in a long dream of the past, living again through those bright April days, with father and daughter, and hearing again the ineffable tenderness in Mario Provana's voice, as he talked to his dying child. What an abyss of time since those sad, sweet days! And now there was nothing left but a name, Mario Provana! Here, and in certain hospitals in London and Rome, where there were wards or beds established in memory of Mario Provana. End of chapter 21. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Chapter 22 of Beyond These Voices. This is a librivox recording. All librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. Beyond These Voices by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. Chapter number 22. Mrs. Rutherford was the fashion in the first year of her second marriage, just as she had been in her London début as Madame Provana. It seemed as if one of the fairies at her christening had given her that inexpressible charm which captivates the crowd, that elusive, indescribable attractiveness which for want of a better name people have agreed to call magnetism. Vera Rutherford was a magnetic woman. Mr. Simon went about telling people that she had psychic attributes which removed her worlds away from the normal woman. And Miranda, the inimitable dressmaker, told her patroness that it was a delight to work for Mrs. Rutherford, not because she was rich enough to pay for the wildest flights in millinery, but because her pale, ethereal beauty lent itself to all that was daring and original in the dress designer's art. People preached to me about Mrs. Montseur's lovely coloring, and what a joy it must be to invent frocks for her. But those pink and white beauties are difficult, said the dressmaker. They require much study, a nuance, just the faintest nuance, on the wrong side, and your pink and white woman looks vulgar. A wrong shade of blue and the peach complexion becomes purple. But with Mrs. Rutherford's alabaster skin, every scheme of color is possible. Mrs. Rutherford was a social success, just as Madame Provana had been. Her entertainments were as frequent and as sumptuous as in the old days, when Mario Provana stalked like a stranger through crowded rooms where hardly one face in 20 afforded him a moment's interest. The entertainments were as sumptuous, but they were more original. The tone was lighter, and gilded youth from the embassies found the house more amusing. Vera is 10 years younger since her second marriage, Lady Susie told people. Cloud aids and abets her in everything frivolous. She used to be just a little too dreamy. Oh, you may call it side. But that it never was. But she is certainly more sociable now, more eagerly interested in the things that interest other people. Claude has made her forget that she is a poet's daughter. She is as keen as mustard about their house and racing stables at Newmarket. She goes to all the big cricket matches with him, things she never thought of in Provana's time. They are not like commonplace husband and wife, but like boy and girl lovers, pleased with everything. I don't wonder if Mr. Simon thinks she has degenerated. He says she is losing her other world look, and is fast becoming a mere mortal. And, as a mere mortal, I hope she won't allow Rutherford to spend all her money, says Susie's confidant, an iron grey bachelor of 50, who spent the greater part of his life sitting in pretty women's pockets. A racing stud is a pretty deep pit for gold at the best, but a man who has married a triple millionaire's widow may safely allow himself one hobby. Rutherford goes in for too many things: his dirigible balloons and his aeroplane, his racing cars and his motor launches, his Ostend holiday, where people say he is hardly ever out of the gambling rooms. Your friend had better keep an eye on her passbook." "Vera!" cried Susie, with uplifted eyebrows. "Vera, look at a passbook." As a banker's widow, she might be supposed to know that there are such financial thermometers. She must have learnt something of business from Provana. She never took the slightest interest in his business, and he was far too noble to degrade her by talking of money. "A pity," said the bachelor. "When a woman's husband is a great financier he may want to talk about money, and his wife ought to be interested in things that are of vital concern for him." "That's a counsel of perfection," said Susie, "and very few women rise to it. All I have ever known about my husband is that he is interested in railways and insurance companies and things, and that when any of them are going wrong I better not talk of my dressmaker's bills, or let him see my passbook." "Then you know what a passbook is?" "I have to," sighed Susie, "for my normal state is an overdrawn account. I think the letters N.E. and N.S. are quite the horridest in the alphabet." "Yet you never ask a friend to help you out of a fix?" "Not much. When it comes to that I shall make a mistake in measuring my dose of chloral, and it will be 'Poor Susan Amphlett, death by misadventure.'" Susan, who had never had an adventure or affairs of her own, was a kind of modern representative of the chorus in a Greek play, and was always explaining people, more especially her bosom friends, of whom Vera was the dearest. She was really fond of Vera, and there was no arretpence of envy and malice in her explanations. Her intense interest in other people may perhaps be attributed to the fact she hardly ever opened a book, not even the novel of the season, and that her knowledge of public events was derived solely from the talk at luncheon tables. Certainly it might be admitted, even by the malicious, that Claude and Vera were an ideal couple. They outraged all modern custom in spending the greater part of their lives in close companionship, he originating all their amusements, and she keenly interested in everything he originated. They were happy, and they were continually telling each other how happy. They always went back to the childish days at Disbrowe. "I feel as if all that ever happened after that was blotted out," Vera whispered, one sunlit afternoon, as they sat side by side among silken cushions on the motor launch, while all the glory of the upper Thames moved past them. "All between those summer days and those seems vague and dim, even the long years with poor Grannie. The wailing about want of money, the moaning over the things we had to do without, the people she hated because they were rich. All those years and the years that came after have gone down into the gulf of forgotten things. A dark curtain, like a pall, has fallen upon the past, and we are living in the present. We love each other, and we are together. That is enough, Claude, is it not? That is enough. That is enough, he echoed, smiling at her from his lower level among the pillows. That heap of down pillows and his lounging attitude among them seemed to epitomize the man and his life. All the same, I want Sinbad the Second to win the Leger. Ah, you always laugh at me, she cried, with a vexed air. You can never be serious. No, I can't, he answered, with a darkening brow, and a voice that was as heavy as lead. They were living upon the rapture of a consummated love, which is something like a rich man living upon his capital. There comes a time when he begins to ask himself how long it will last. They had loved each other for years, first unconsciously with a divine innocence, at least on the woman's part, then consciously, and with a vague sense of sin, and then, all obstacles being removed, triumphantly, assured of the long future in which nothing could part them. She repeated this often, in impassioned moments. Nothing can part us. Whatever fate may bring we shall be together. There can be no more parting. He was not given to serious thoughts. He never had been. His one irresistible charm had been his careless enjoyment of the present hour, and indifference to all that might come after. He had never considered the ultimate result of any action in his life. He left the army with no more thought than he left off a soiled glove. He threw up a painter's art and all its chances of delight and fame the moment he found discouragement and difficulty. He hated difficult things. He hated hard work. He hated giving up anything he liked. His haunting idea of evil was the dread of being bored. Once Vera found herself making an involuntary comparison between the dead man and the living. If Claude had a dying daughter whom he loved, could he have watched her sink into her grave, and kept the secret of his sorrow, and smiled at her while his heart was breaking? She knew he could not. He was a creature of light and variable moods, of sunshine and fine weather. She had loved him for his lightness. He had brought her relief from ennui whenever he crossed her threshold. He had brought her gladness and gay thoughts, as a man brings a bunch of June roses to his sweetheart. And now that the past was done with, and that she was his for ever, they were to be always glad and gay. There was to be no gloom in the atmosphere, no long, dull pause in life to give time for dark thoughts. Everybody has something to be sorry for, Vera told Susan Amphlett. That's why people's existence is a perpetual rush. Niagara can have no time to think. But imagine, if nature were alive, what long aching thoughts there might be under the bosom of a great smooth lake. You know, my darling Vera, I generally think everything you do is perfect, Susan answered, more sensibly than her wont. But I sometimes fear that you and Claude are burning the candle at both ends. You are too much alive. You seem to be running a race with time. Neither your health nor your beauty can last at the pace you are going. I'll take my chance of that. There is one thing that I dread more than being ill and growing ugly. What is that? Living to be old. What? You've caught my fear? I dread the long, slow years, the long, slow days and sleepless nights. Old people sleep very little, in which there is nothing but thought, an endless web of miserable thoughts, going slowly round and round, never stopping, never changing. That's what I am afraid of, Susie." "Strange for you to be afraid of anything," her friend said thoughtfully. "I think you are the most courageous woman I have ever heard of. As brave as Joan of Arc, or Charlotte Corday." "Why?" "Because you are not afraid to live in this house." "Why not?" "What does the house matter?" "It must make you think sometimes," faltered Susan. "I won't think. But if I were to think of the past, the house would make no difference. My thoughts would be the same in Mexico, or at the North Pole. I have heard of people who go to the end of earth to forget things. But I should never do that. I should know that memory would go with me." For 3 seasons in London, for 3 winters in Rome, the pace went on, and was accelerated rather than slackened with the passing of the years. Claude Rutherford won the blue ribbon of the turf, with Sinbad the Second, and was equally fortunate with his boat at Cowes. If he did not cross the Channel or fly from London to Liverpool, he did at least make sundry costly excursions in the air, which kept his name in the daily papers, and made his wife miserable, till, aviation having resulted in boredom, he promised to content himself with the substantial earth. After those 3 years this boy and girl couple began to discover that they had done everything brilliant and exciting that there was to be done, and the fever called living began to pall. And now Susan Amphlett told people that Vera was killing herself, and that her husband, though as passionately in love with her as ever he had been, was selfish and thoughtless, and was spending her money and ruining her health with the extravagances and agitations of a racing stable that was on a scale he ought never to have allowed himself. "After all, it is her money," said Susan, "and it's bad form on his part to be so reckless. But as she has only a life interest in Provana's millions, and as her trustees are some of the sharpest business men in London, Rutherford can't do her much harm," said masculine common sense, while feminine malice was lifting its shoulders and eyebrows with doleful prognostics. "Well, I suppose the money is all right," said Chorus, still inclined to be tragic. "It's her health I'm afraid of. She's losing her high spirits, her joy in everything, and she is getting out of touch with her husband. She could hardly give him a smile when Blue Rose won the Oaks. She sat in a corner of her box, looking the other way, while that lovely animal was coming down the hill neck and neck with the favourite, at a moment when any other woman would have been simply frantic. She is not of the stuff that racing men's wives are made of," says Eustace Lyon, the poet. "No doubt she was worlds away, in dreamland, and did not even know whose mare the bookies and the mob were cheering." "She was not like that 2 years ago," says Chorus. "She and Claude were in such perfect sympathy that it was impossible for either of them to have a joy that the other did not share. It was a case of two souls with but a single thought." "I can quite believe that, for I never gave C.R. credit for thinking," replied the poet. Satiety had come. It came in a day, the fatal day that comes to all the favoured and the fortunate, and which never comes to the poor and the unlucky. That evil least is spared to nature's stepchildren. They never have too much of anything except debt and difficulty. They never yawn in each other's faces, and ask themselves where they can go for the summer. They never turn over the leaves of a continental Bradshaw, and complain that they are tired of everywhere. It is the people who can go everywhere and have everything who find the wide earth a garden run to seed, and feel the dust of the desert in their mouths, as they talk of the pleasure places that the herd long for. This time has come for Vera, at the end of her third season as Claude Rutherford's wife. He, the gay and the insouciant, was careless still, but it was a new kind of carelessness, the carelessness that comes from hating everything that an exhausted life can give. They had fallen into the fashion of their friends of late, and were more like the normal semi-detached couple than the boy and girl lovers upon whose bliss Lady Susan had loved to expatiate. When the Goodwood week came round in this third year with the inexorable regularity that one finds in the events of the season, Vera declared that she had enough of Goodwood and would never go there again. "Of course that won't prevent your being there," she said. "Well, not exactly, when I have Isuot of Ireland in 2 races." "Yes, of course. You must be there. I forgot." "You seem always to forget my horses nowadays. Yet you were once so keen about them." "They were very interesting at first, poor sweet things, but the fonder I was of them, the more cruel it seemed to race them." "You'd like them kept to look at, eh?" "I should like to sit with them in their boxes, and feed them with sugar, and make them lie down with their heads in my lap." "A lady rarely." "I sometimes long for a paradise of animals, some lovely pastoral valley, with a silver stream winding through the deep grass, where I might live among beautiful innocent creatures, sheep and deer, and Jersey cows, and great calm, cream colored oxen from the Campagna, creatures that can lie in the sun and bask, knowing nothing of the past, feeling nothing but the warmth and beauty of the world, and where I myself should have lost the faculty of thought." "That's a queer fancy." "I have many queer fancies. They come to me in dreams." "You'd much better come to Goodwood. All the world will be there, and you'd like to see Insuit win. Haven't you enough frocks? Is that the reason for not coming?" "I have too many frocks, some that I have never worn." "Handsel them at Lady Waterby's. You'll be the prettiest woman there." "It's dear of you to say that." Her eyes clouded as she spoke. "But I can't go. I'm so tired of it all. Claude, so tired." "Do you suppose I am never tired of things? Sick to death. But I know that to be happy one must keep moving. That's a law of human life. You better come, Vera. You'd be moped to extinction alone." "Don't mind loneliness, and I shall have Susan part of the time, and there will be a meeting in the Albany." "De gustibus? Well, if you prefer Simon and his spooks to a racecourse in an old English park, there's nothing more to be said." He stooped to kiss the pale forehead before he sauntered out of the room, yawning as he went. He had always a tired air, but it had verily because a law of his being to keep moving. "Nemesis is like the policeman on night duty," he used to say. "She won't let us lie in the dust and sleep. We must trudge on." Trudging from one costly pleasure to another might not suggest hardship to the loafer on the embankment, but to a self-indulgent worldling who has drained the cup of life to the dregs, that necessity of going on drinking when there are only the dregs to drink may seem hard to bear. End of chapter 22. Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC.